Good afternoon, everyone. Today is December 14th, and this is the meeting.
Recording in progress.
This is the meeting of the Douglas County Planning Commission. You can maybe see me on the screen and hear me, but I am not physically present. Unfortunately, we have about 18 inches of snow in Tahoe, where I reside, so I was not able to make it over to the meeting formally, but I do appreciate my colleagues being there. And we also have two other planning commissioners on Zoom, Christy Candell and Nick Meyer. And Christy and Nick, if you could both acknowledge that you were there, and then we'll determine that a quorum is present.
Yes, Christy Candell is present.
Thank you, Christy. Nick, are you on the Zoom call at this moment? Okay, Nick may be logging in, so we'll ask him when he comes to please acknowledge his presence, and we can move forward. I would also note that as I've observed when I'm in the meeting room, we do have about a 3 to 5 second delay. So there may be a pause from my speaking to moving to the next person. And I do appreciate everybody's tolerance of those kind of technical glitches. So I'll call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. And Nick, have you popped onto the screen? Nick, if you're there, if you could indicate that you're present.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much, Nick. I'm in Tahoe, and you're wherever you're at, so we've got a collection of locations today. So we do have quorum. All members are present. And I would ask, Mark, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you very much, Mark. We will now go to public comment. At this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Planning Commission. Additional public comment periods may be allowed on individual agenda items at the discretion of the chairperson. It is requested that members of the public comment on those agenda items when they are considered. In addition to opening public comment will also be taken on each item listed on the agenda when they are discussed by the Planning Commission. We will also have closing public comment. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker on matters over which the Planning Commission has jurisdiction, supervision, or control. The Planning Commission wants to encourage the respectful consideration of all views by members of the public. If the content is willfully disruptive of the meeting by being irrelevant, repetitious, slanderous, offensive, inflammatory, irrational, or amounts to a personal attack or interfering with the rights of others, the individual will be asked to stop speaking. So if there is public comment from members of the people present in the meeting room, if you'd please go to the microphone, sign in and state your name and begin your public comment.
Commissioner Walder?
Yes.
Or Chairman Walder, sorry. Ellie Waller, she's on Zoom. She would like to make opening comment.
Certainly. You can go ahead, Ellie, at this point and make your comment.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Walder. I'm hoping staff will shed some light on a proposal that I saw in the newspaper stating that it was going to happen in Douglas County at Hayborn Road and Johnson Lane. I'm not sure if anybody else saw the local bounty plans to construct a roughly 300,000 square foot greenhouse facility. Be nice to know when this is coming forward. And he's gotten, this bounty company has gotten $1 million in tax abatements, and we don't even know about this project. Second, I just wanted to bring to light, and I think many of you may have heard this or my comments at the Board of Commissioners, that Clear Creek is proposing another development on their Snyder Ranch project site. It's in pre-application right now. I'm looking forward to coming to the planning commissioners as well as the Board of County Commissioners. There's lots to be considered here. It is a very unique site. It's going to have some issues with ingress and egress as a secondary option and requirement. It is going to be burdensome to the Alpine View Estate subdivision with the proposal of 61 homes. So far, we're doing well with the Freedom Ranch proposal and the 16 homes that will eventually be completed there. 61 is quite the number that will be added to that. You'll be hearing lots of comments from me, and I'm looking forward again to staff coming forward as soon as an actual application is filed. Thank you for the opportunity today, and everybody stay safe. I live in a cul-de-sac, which has its own challenges of getting out. I really
Well,
Thank you very much, Ellie. You cut off at the last sentence or two, but I think you were
wanted to be there today, but it wasn't in the card. Okay, thank you so much. Just everybody be safe. Challenges, like everybody else, I live in a cul-de-sac, and I really wanted to be at the meeting today, but could not be.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Likewise, I live in a cul-de-sac and it can be challenging. So we appreciate your comment and your interest in those topics. Is there additional public comment either on Zoom or in the meeting room?
Chairman Walder, this is Michelle Pablo, Deputy Clerk. For the record, it doesn't seem we have in-person public comment.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Colleen, if we don't have any more Zoom public comment, then I'll be prepared to close public comment.
yes, Ellie's our only public on Zoom here.
Thank you very much. So as of 1:07, opening public comment is closed. We'll move on to the first item, which is approval of the agenda for possible action. Approval of the proposed agenda. The Planning Commission reserves the right to take items in a different order, to combine two or more agenda items for consideration, and to remove items from the agenda or delay discussion relating to an item on the agenda at any time. We do have just the two items that are listed in the packet on the agenda. If we have comments from the members of the Planning Commission, we can entertain comments on the approval of the agenda now. If not, we can move to any public comment on approval of the agenda. Any other comments from members of the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chair, I move adoption of the agenda.
I would like to make sure if we can have a public comment, Maureen. I would doubt that there is, but Ellie, would you like to make comments on the items on the agenda for approval of the agenda, or is there any public comment in the audience? No. Okay, go ahead, Maureen, and make the motion.
I made the motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that motion.
Maureen moves to approve the agenda. Mark seconds the motion. Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, then I'll call for the vote on approval of the agenda. All those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to approve the agenda? So in this votes, there are 7 votes aye, no votes nay, and the agenda is approved. We'll move to approval of the minutes. This is for possible action. Approve of the draft minutes of the Planning Commission October 12th meeting. Are there any comments from members of the Planning Commission on the minutes of the October 12th meeting?
Only comment I have is they were very well done.
Thank you, Maureen. Yes, I agree. Any public comment, Ellie, or in the meeting room on the approval of the minutes? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes, Brian Olin.
Is there a
Second.
second? Brian moves to approve the minutes. Maureen seconds the motion. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Bryce.
I'm going to abstain from the vote since I was not present at the meeting.
Thank you very much, Bryce.
Mr. Chairman, I'm doing the same since I was not at the meeting.
Thank you very much, Mark. If there's no further discussion, then I'll call for a vote on approval of the minutes. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
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 Any opposed to approving the minutes? So in this vote, there are 5 votes aye and 2 abstentions for the individuals who were not at the meeting. So the minutes are approved 5-0. We'll now move forward to the first item on our agenda. I'll read this into the record. This is for presentation only. Presentation of the 2001 Outstanding Rural Plan Award for the Douglas County 2020 Master Plan, awarded by the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association. Sam, would you like to discuss this item briefly?
Yes, thank you and good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Sam Booth, Deputy Director of Community Development. This item I placed on the agenda today just to touch base and give a report to the Planning Commission on an award presented to Douglas County and more specifically to the Douglas County Master Plan, the 2020 Master Plan. The Nevada state chapter of the American Planning Association at our October conference awarded the 2020 Master Plan as the Outstanding Rural Plan or Project. We received a nice plaque. You guys can see here. Our staff submitted an application ahead of the conference. We were judged on several different areas, on advocacy, benefit to the community, contribution, the community need, and the implementation of the plan. Got quite a long write-up here that we submitted, and ultimately, I believe the judges agreed with the description we put in there. But of course, to recap, I know you guys know what that process was, but after quite a bit of work that was put in 2016 and 2017 by the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners, ultimately the plan wasn't approved. And in 2019, we had a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the Commissioners asking to move forward and pick the plan back up, the draft plan we had at the time, and take it forward in the process. We had many public workshops in 2019. We sent out over 8,000 mailers to residents in 2019 about changes to the proposed maps. In 2020, we brought on Wood Rogers to assist with rewriting portions of the plan. Public workshops at the community center in 2020. We had 2 days worth of public workshops that were both hosted online as well as in person due to COVID. The Planning Commission held 5 review and workshops on the draft plan in October and November of 2020. Ultimately, the plan was presented and approved by the commissioners just about 1 year ago today in December of 2020. So just want to say thank you to the Planning Commission, of course, to the commissioners as well for all the work you guys put in, all the time we had spent in those workshops and in drafting the language, the action items, all those type of things here. In the packet today, you can see we did receive some comments back from the judges that presented us the award. Lorenzo Mastino, our senior planner, and I attended the conference in October, and the judges stated that the resulting document was a high-quality product, the kind that shows both the care in developing the plan and the intent to effectively communicate your goals and ideas. And additionally, they said it covers a lot of ground, but it does a good job of connecting the dots between the broader issues and the very specific needs or actions for the community. So once again, sometimes we don't do a great job of celebrating our wins. After we complete a project, we move on to the next one. But I thought this was, a nice pat on the back that we received from the State Planning Association, recognizing the hard work that we all put in and that you guys gave us. So just wanted to say thank you and present this to you today.
Thank you very much, Sam. I think we all are in debt to all of the county staff, particularly you, Tom Dallaire, and all the other staff who've worked so hard to get the master plan pulled together and to get it approved both by the Planning Commission and by the Board of County Commissioners. So My fellow commissioners, I thank you as well. We worked long, we worked hard, we worked under difficult circumstances, and altogether it was an excellent product done by collaboration amongst all of us. So I thank everyone for their excellent work. And this is just one sign of recognition that I think is well deserved for what we did. I'm happy to open it up to other members of the Planning Commission for any comments they'd like to make.
I'd like to say that we couldn't have done it without you, without Sam and Lorenzo and Tom and the rest of the staff. That you made us look good. No, we couldn't have done it without you. We just sat here and made decisions on your work, and we piggybacked on you. And that our master plan is what it is because of all the time you put in making these hearings happy and putting up with us. So thank you, kudos to you, and you deserve this award all by yourself. Not because of anything that we did. That's the way I feel about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maureen. I concur. I think Sam has it up in his office, so that's a sign he can look to all the time. Other members of the Planning Commission that wish to speak on this topic?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. This is Mark. I too want to echo Maureen's comments. Sam, Tom, and Lorenzo was not here in the whole part, but I'd like to thank them as well.
Thank you, Mark. Other comments from members of the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chairman, Member Klutz, for the record, I think this is a great example and reflection of what happens when an entire county comes together. This is great work on behalf of the county commissioners, the Planning Commission, staff, countless community input by the members and citizens of this county. And I think this is just a small token of what it looks like when an entire community and county comes together. There's a lot of hard work by a lot of people who have a vested interest and love this county. And I can't say enough about staff working hard to bring it all together, to consider everybody's input, and I'm glad that it was recognized.
Thank you, Bryce. I couldn't agree more. Any other comments from Planning Commission members? If not, we can move forward to any members of the audience in the meeting room or anyone on Zoom who would like to make comments on this agenda item.
Hi, Ellie Waller. Is it time to just, or should I wait for Colleen?
No, you can go ahead, Ellie. If you'd like to make comment on this agenda item, please go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. I too want to thank staff for the monumental task it took. I didn't join in right away, but did participate for 2.5 years, along with several other members of the community that attended every possible meeting, I believe, if not all of them. And with that said, looking forward to when master plan amendments come forward, that the public is definitely heard. And I think that personally, I can say there were some things that I think could have been changed based on public input and not just what came from staff and the board members. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ellie. We do appreciate all the members of the public who participated in the process as well. And I think you made some very valid points. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't also thank all of the additional staff that did so much hard work behind the scenes. Colleen, you always did a great job on the meetings and all of the extraneous issues that we had to deal with. Sam Taylor, you helped us immensely through every step of the process. And I know the county manager's office, the GIS staff, the clerk's office, I'm probably omitting some people, but there were probably 10, 20, 30, 40 people in the staff who did assist on this effort. So we all do appreciate everything they did. And Sam, you were outstanding in every respect. So I hope you look on that award every day and recognize the contributions you made. If there are no other public comments on this, then I can move to the next agenda item. Colleen, anything else that you see, or Michelle, are there any people in the meeting room who would like to make additional comments?
I think we're good on Zoom.
Michelle Pablo, Deputy Clerk for the record. No in-person public comment at this time.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll close agenda item number 1 and move to the second agenda item. I will read this into the record. This is for possible action. Discussion on a major design review for a proposed personal storage facility comprised of 79,215 square feet of enclosed self-storage and 60,300 square feet outdoor covered RV storage space in the SI, which is Service Industrial Zoning District, within the Gardnerville Community Plan. The subject parcels are located at 1608 Pine Nut Road and approximately 25 acres in size. The applicant is American Recess and the property owner is James J. Butch Perry. APNs 1220-11-002-022, 1220-11-002-023. Development application DP 21-0221. And on this particular agenda item, we will have a presentation by staff, and then we will have a presentation by the applicant. And then, since this project was reviewed by the town of Gardnerville, we will have individuals from the town of Gardnerville who will also make a presentation. So I would like to have the presentations made, and then if we can withhold questions till the end of all 3 presentations, then we'll move to the Planning Commission members to ask questions of any of the people who made presentations. So Sam Booth, if you would like to kick us off with a summary of the project, and then we'll move forward.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. Sam Booth, Deputy Director for the record. As the chairman just read, this development application in agenda item number 2 today is DP 21-0245, and this is discussion on a design review for a personal storage facility. A few procedural notes about why we're discussing this today. This application is for a major design review, and as described in Title 20.614, this is required for all new construction and within the, this is light Service Industrial Zoning District. The procedures for a design review are that the Director of Community Development is the final decision maker for a design review. And these applications are subject to administrative review. They do not typically require a public hearing, and the filing of the project must be in accordance with 2020. Those are our noticing procedures. We do send notices to adjacent property owners and notice to the newspaper for this as well. Additionally, Title 20.08 discusses the review by advisory bodies. And specifically states that permits within the jurisdictions of the towns shall be reviewed by the applicable town board, and the board will be deemed an advisory body within the jurisdiction. So that the board, in this case, the application is within the town of Gardnerville. The town of Gardnerville board reviewed the application. They're advisory to staff on any particular design review. So they make their recommendation, and then as staff is reviewing the application, we take into account the town's recommendation on the item. So the town board, as I mentioned, did review this project and recommended 5-0 that community development deny the application. Community development staff, in doing our review, believes that the application meets the required findings in Title 20 and the requirements, and we do believe it meets the Town of Gardnerville design guidelines. However, due to the discrepancy between community development staff's review and the unanimous decision by the town board to deny the application. Title 20 does give the ability for the director to refer applications to the Planning Commission for review. So we thought this was an appropriate application to do to that, to refer to the Planning Commission today to review the design and the project. And I believe that's the bottom of the slide there. So we do have, as the chairman stated, the town manager for the town of Gardnerville is here this afternoon. And so I'll let him speak to many of the items about what the town board did. But in your packet, we have some, the approval letter from the town. I believe the staff report to the town and presentation are there as well. But on November 2nd, the town board reviewed the application. That's where they voted 5-0 to deny the application. In their recommendation, the following reasons were highlighted, or staff in this case highlighted a few reasons that we saw. I think first and foremost is that they believed it did not meet the minimum standards. The proposed design did not meet the minimum standards required in the town of Gardnerville design guidelines. And those design guidelines have been accepted by the Board of Commissioners. They believe there were substandard materials and architecture included in the design, and that the design guidelines do not specifically do not permit metal buildings, even in industrial zone properties, as this one here is today. And they highlighted a few of the Douglas County Code findings in Title 20 that they believed it was deficient in. I'll highlight those in just a few minutes. Additionally, the town board noted that they didn't object to the use of the parcel as personal self-storage, but they believed it was beyond the scope of the design guidelines for them to be able to recommend approval on. So there are 8 findings for a major design review. And let me see if I can tell you. Those start in your packet on page 64 and go through page 65. You can see those here. I think we also, as I stated, those are in the packet. The town board believed that finding B here was deficient, that the proposed development is compatible with and preserves the character and integrity of adjacent development and neighborhoods, and includes improvements or modifications either on-site or within public right-of-way to mitigate development-related adverse impacts, such as traffic, noise, odors, visual nuisances, or other adverse impacts to adjacent development and neighborhoods. These improvements or modifications may include, shall not include, or be limited to the placement or the orientation of the buildings and entryways, parking areas, buffer yards, and the addition of landscaping walls or both. As I had mentioned earlier, they also believed it was deficient in not being able to meet finding E, which says the proposed development incorporates features to minimize adverse impacts, including impacts of the proposed development on adjacent properties. And finding G, that the proposed development complies with all additional standards imposed on it by the particular provisions of this chapter and Douglas County design criteria and standards and other requirements of Title 20. So much of the discussion, I think, this afternoon is going to depend on discussion revolving the Town of Gardnerville design guidelines. The county commissioners adopted the design guidelines in a resolution, Resolution 2020-R-125, a year ago in December 17th of 2020. In that resolution, you can see the last paragraph there. It states that now therefore be it resolved, the Douglas County Board of Commissioners, that the design guidelines for the town of Gardnerville and the design guidelines for the town of Minden were created by the towns in their capacity as advisory bodies to Douglas County and are hereby reviewed and accepted by the Board of Commissioners. It goes on to say that Douglas County will utilize these design guidelines to the greatest extent possible for development projects located within the towns and without creating conflicts between the design standards and existing Douglas County Code. Again, that was approved on the 17th of December, 2020. So staff agrees that we are in an administrative review like this, that we are, of course, reviewing Title 20 and the 8 findings that I had highlighted there, but additionally, we are reviewing the Town of Gardnerville design guidelines to see if the proposed project meets the town's design guidelines. So some background on the location of the project. Let's see, I may have lost my highlight here. Here we go. The subject site is right here and located here in red. The orange boundary is the town of Gardnerville town boundary. It's right on the edge of the site. This is at the intersection of Pine Nut Road and Pine Nut Court. Pine Nut Court there is the south side of the site, and it's a cul-de-sac that ends just west of the site there. Does not connect out to 395. The future land use of the site, as designated in the master plan, is industrial. You can see that shown here. The site generally is where this red box is. There are 2 parcels that the site is being overlaid on. It is contained entirely within the industrial land use and the industrial or service industrial zoning. There's a boundary line adjustment that's being processed currently to move this property line back to the edge of the project parameters, and basically the line there between the industrial and commercial land use and also zoning. And as you can see on this zoning map here, the zoning of the site is service industrial. As I stated earlier, within the service industrial zoning, personal storage facility is permitted with a design review. Here we have the site plan for the site. Again, you can see that Pine Nut Court is to the south, Pine Nut Road is to the east. There's some buffer landscaping along both of those roads. There are buildings. It is oriented towards the corner. It is a kind of a, well, it's a corner lot there at the intersection of the 2 roads. The main entrance is off of Pine Nut Court to the south. There are several buildings around the exterior of the site to house for storage facilities. And then on the interior of the site, there are some shelter and canopies for covered boat and RV storage. So as staff does a review on a design like this, of course, as I said, we're taking into account Title 20. We're also trying to take into account the town's design guidelines at this point. As I pointed out in the resolution stated that to the extent that the 2 don't conflict, that staff will apply the design guidelines. I think part of our concern or question with the design guidelines is the difference between a guideline, the guidelines themselves, and the standards that are included and approved as Douglas County Code. You know, as I have on the screen here, the difference between a standard and guideline is that a standard is a level or quality of attainment, while a guideline is a non-specific rule or principle that provides direction to action or behavior. I think it's Douglas County staff's interpretation that architectural design guidelines are to be a starting point and a good discussion point to point you in the right direction. This is what the town has determined: the architectural types, the pedestrian orientation, the buildings and massing of those buildings that they would like to see. And again, as the resolution pointed out, to the extent that those don't conflict with county code, it's county code that takes precedence. But they're guidelines to guide you in the right direction. So there are a few sections in the design guidelines that I've highlighted on this slide here. I think starting from left to right, in section 1 of the design guidelines, of course, there's a preamble. It talks about that the plan for prosperity describes areas of the town and standards as well, and that these are carrying the plan for prosperity forward in design guidelines to implement portions of that. And section 1 is overarching design goals that the plan has. But there's also a section 5 towards the end of the design guidelines that specifically speaks to commercial corridors and new employment areas. And I think that also some of our staff's opinion here is that there's a difference between the historic Gardnerville and Main Street Gardnerville and some of these commercial and industrial corridors that are on the edge of town. I believe town staff is going to speak to and did in their staff report that in the overarching design goals in section 1, There's a section, and this is highlighted on the right side of your slide, for materials and colors. And it says that certain materials have an inherently inexpensive or insubstantial quality, and these materials should not be used in new construction or renovation. And then they give examples, and it says examples for roofs, or in this case, examples for walls, that vinyl, metal, plywood, T11 siding, masonite, or other sheet metals are not to be used. Those are inherently inexpensive, insubstantial quality. And again, as I had stated, and I think that town staff will speak to, that they believe that due to this overarching design goals, that metal is not a material that should be used on, as the guidelines say here, any new construction or renovation. But as we look further through the document in section 5, which again applies to the commercial corridors and new business areas, section 5.3 specifically says new and existing employment areas, and then it says industrial and business districts. And I think it's our opinion that this is more specific. Of course, there's those overarching goals and ideas that apply to all of areas within the town, but this is specifically speaking to industrial and business districts. And it's within this area that there's a section on industrial and office architectural principles and guidelines, states that stock plan buildings and generic designs are discouraged. I think the town staff and our staff both agree on that. But materials and colors in new business areas, in that section, it says that they should reinforce overall massing and architectural concepts, portray a sense of quality and permanence. And then it says discouraged wall materials are faux stone, plywood, hardboard, or vinyl materials. But I think the important thing here is that it doesn't list metal as a discouraged wall material in section 5 that applies to industrial and business districts. And that's at the heart at our disagreements, I believe, in the interpretation of at least this section of the design guidelines. In the next few pages, on page 73 of the design guidelines, there's a discussion of building orientation in these business parks, industrial parks, that the entries should be placed to reinforce their presence on primary business streets, and where they can enhance pedestrian linkages to other buildings. We believe it does do that. The next paragraph there says that buildings located at intersections should orient the building entries toward the corner. And as you saw in the site plan, this is a corner lot. We believe that the design of the site is oriented toward the corner. They have an entryway that faces right out at the corner. Of course, that's not the main entrance into the facility, but the massing, rather than the site being placed at the back of the lot with a parking lot in front of it, or an L shape or something like that you see many times, they've oriented the building to fit the shape of the lot. And I believe that's what the design guidelines are talking to here, that the placement should shape and activate public spaces. There's some landscaping along the outside of the property, of course, the sidewalks that are there, those type of things. And importantly, on the right side of the slide here, there's some images that show what the design guidelines, I believe, are trying to have in these business parks. And you can see at the top left image here, it says undesirable, and it's a pretty blank building with just some windows. It says lacks color or texture, flat profile, poor panel and window proportions. And then it shows underneath it what's desirable is added color and texture to panels, architectural profile, expressed bays and windows, express corner windows, something, features on the building that make it more interesting, not just a flat building itself. And then the example provided at the bottom of that page shows a metal siding lobby on a tilt-up industrial building. And again, I think this is just more evidence to show that the design guidelines do allow some metal siding in certain instances, and in this case, particularly in business parks. Sorry about that. There's also a section on screen walls, security fences. I think the town also had some concerns about the perimeter wall around the site. Per Douglas County Code, a 6-foot wall is required around any mini storage facility, personal storage facility. And that can be either a concrete block wall or a fence. And if it's a fence, you have to have dense landscaping on the outside of the building. In the design guidelines here for screen walls, you can see it says that, let's see, when walls or fences, screen walls are generally regarded as mitigation for poor site planning. However, when walls or fences are required, and in this case they are by Title 20, they should be designed as an extension of architectural and landscape design concepts. I think if you look at the elevations of the facility, the wall in this case is the outer side of the buildings. So it is an extension of the architectural features of the building themselves. And we think the applicant has designed it to look like, from the exterior, one of those images that was shown in the design guidelines, like an office building or a warehouse. There are windows, there are portions of the wall that jut out and jut in, and there are some different features and textures that they have there, which we believe is preferable than what we see in many cases with mini storage facilities like this, which is just a 6-foot concrete block wall. So we believe that the standards in these sections have been met. Let's see here. To recap, and I won't belabor these points too many times because the town's going to speak to this, but from our reading of the report and talking to the town staff, they recommended denial based on that the materials have an inherently cheap quality and should not be used, and the example specifically being that they have metal siding on the exterior of the building and the wall, and that the screen walls should be architecturally treated as an extension of the building. And I believe the town's design, or what they're looking for, is more of an architectural concrete block wall than rather what is proposed by the applicant here. And they also took exception to the tacked-on elements as poorly proportioned tacked-on elements that do not fit the building's character and that they're discouraged. Our points here as a rebuttal to some of these points that, again, I believe that there are sections of the design guidelines that do allow for metal as a siding material in business and industrial parks. The issue here is that we're concerned that with the way that this is being applied is that it would imply that across the entire town, no use of these materials here is allowed, and no use of metal as a siding material is allowed. We do believe, as I pointed out, that the screen walls are meeting the requirements of the design guidelines. We think that is what the project is doing. And then, again, we disagree with the, assertion that the elements on the exterior of the buildings and the exterior wall, that those are tacked on elements that don't fit the character. I think it does improve the character of the structure. It makes it more interesting to look at from the street than just a flat blank concrete block wall. Again, so you have the town manager's recommendation in the staff report in your packet. There are some, the minutes of the town board meeting were posted as supplemental. They were posted after the publication of the packet, but I think there are a few comments here that we picked up from the minutes when they were published from the town board meeting and from the town board members themselves that I think are interesting. Mr. Miller stated that to him, the guidelines were originally written with Main Street and the Main Street district in mind, and that this site is further out 395 and you're going to see new development and not all of it matches. And he said that he thinks the board needs to take this into consideration, that this is a good looking building on the edge of town and there are going to be other developments around it in the future. And keeping in mind, excuse me, that's cut off, that we need to redo the design guidelines in future meetings. And stated that last month they had approved a building that is partial metal and partial other materials. And he said he personally liked the project and thinks it's in the right direction. Mr. Higuera said he agreed with Ken. I think there was some discussion there about the design guidelines, and that they felt that the town manager's in a bad position because he's just trying to apply the design guidelines in the language that's within them. But he said at the end of his comments there, you can see, I think we need to have a workshop on the design guidelines. It's not cookie cutter and it's not one size fits all. It needs some more latitude. And then Mrs. Slater said that she hoped, that's why she wanted the applicant to come to common ground with the town and meet the town manager halfway. And then she had made comments that she didn't believe that they had made any effort to meet the town's design guidelines or to meet them halfway. If she saw something a little more accepting, she might be willing to vote to approve. But of course, ultimately, after these comments, the board did vote to deny the project 5-0, as we stated. So in our review of the design review, there are several conditions that are drafted and in the staff report in your packet. These are very typical and standard conditions that we place on every design review, that you have to meet each section of the Title 20, and we call out those sections that must be met. Additional conditions that were drafted based on this self-storage use include that on-site lighting is required, that shall be stationary and directed away from adjoining properties in public right-of-way. No flammable or hazardous materials can be stored on site. Residential quarters for a manager or caretaker may be provided in the development. That's the personal storage facility standards allow a caretaker residence, and that storage facilities located adjacent to residential districts should have hours of operation restricted to 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. and Monday through Friday or through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. I do have a proposed condition. As you'll see, I think the applicant is going to give a presentation as well. I think it was the day before the publication of the packet, the applicant sent us some updated revised elevations and plans. I believe that they've made an effort to meet some of the changes that the town board requested, and I'll let the applicant speak to those. But if the Planning Commission is in agreement with those changes that they've proposed, I have a draft condition here that they must submit revised plans in conformance with their presentation today, and that must be completed prior to the issuance of a building permit. This would be condition C3 that would be added to the report. So to recap the discussion, Douglas County staff believes the findings may be made in the affirmative and requests for the requested design review, and staff recommends approval. And with that, Mr. Chairman, as I stated, I believe there are representatives from American Recess that are on the call and prepared to make a presentation. And then the town board member, or excuse me, town manager is here to make a presentation as well.
Thank you very much, Sam. We appreciate the presentation. We will move to the applicant, and if you can please state your name so that we can have that for the record. Each time you speak, that helps the clerk transcribe the minutes. So I will turn it over to either Larry or Christina, or I believe we have Reed Hamilton. But again, please state your name for the record, and then you can go ahead and make your presentation, and then we'll move forward to Eric.
Hello, everybody. My name is Reed Hamilton. I am the owner of American Recess. I'd like to just take a moment and say thank you very much for all the time, energy, and effort that has gone into not only today's meeting, but the multiple meetings that we've had to get to this point. At this time, I'd love to start a quick presentation, and I believe that will be controlled via the town, or I'm sorry, the county can get that presentation started. Is that something that Mr. Booth can proceed with? I believe it starts on page 160.
Reed, this is Sam Booth from Community Development. We have the presentation in the packet, but I don't have the ability to pull that up in the room. I don't know if you can share screen.
Well, let's see if I can. I don't know if I will be given the ability to share screen, but let's try this. Can you guys see that screen? My screen?
Yes.
Hey, fantastic. All right. Well, so I'm just going to walk through this relatively quickly. If anybody has any questions as I go through I guess we will not, we'll do questions at the end. So here is just kind of an overview of what our project is going to look like. Quick summary, we've talked about this already, but it's approximately 80,000 square feet of self-storage and then 60,000 square feet of what are going to be boat and RV covers. And so imagine carports of sorts. We're spreading this out over the course of 9 buildings. And as mentioned a few times, we're in an industrial or service industrial zoning with storage having an approved use with design review. As Mr. Booth presented already, here's where the site is located. I don't know about everybody else, but I'm visual. I love photos. This is kind of what it currently looks like. And as you can see, there's not a lot of growth around us yet. We believe that this is going to be a good long-term investment for us. But as everyone knows in real estate, location, we're taking a bit of a gamble on this one about how far we are already away from everything at the moment. Here's some street views that just kind of show you what it looks like on Pine Nut. And as we've seen a few times, here's an aerial, and then I think here's actually a little bit of a better one, where so you can see the buildings here in the back are going to be primarily self-storage. Some of them will be climate controlled, and then everything in here is going to be the boat and RV. And take a step back just to explain, we build self-storage facilities all over the West Coast, and we don't just go and put a storage facility anywhere. We really do a ton of research. And the reason we've chose to work in Gardnerville is because if you try to go find a single unit right now, it's incredibly challenging. And then if you try to park your boat and RV somewhere, it's like 10 times more challenging. And so we like this area because we know what the demand is. The community is basically really strapped for any type of storage space whatsoever. Moving on to the next slide here. So this was the presentation that we presented to the town, as mentioned in November. These are some of the colors that we do on a lot of our facilities throughout the West Coast. And via feedback, you're going to see kind of, we decided to make some changes because the request from the town was that to be a little bit more earth tone. And so I'm going to skip a slide. Well, I'll just go through. This was what we had originally proposed for landscape as well, with some evergreen, but mostly deciduous. And one of the other requests from the town was we wanted to see a lot more evergreen because, as we all know, in Nevada, there's no leaves on the trees right now, only snow at the moment. And so here's what we've come up with. Like I said, trying to do what we can. If we built every project to the desire of everyone it'd probably be, diamond and gold studded, but we have economic drivers that allow us to build to a certain point. And due to rent and demand in Gardnerville, we can charge, basically a certain number, and that allows us to create our budget for what we can build a project for. And so after meeting with the town, we've actually came back and we wanted to make another presentation, but we've just, for lots of reasons, we believe it makes sense for us to just move forward the way we are and present today. But we've included a lot more stone. As you can see, we've changed the color of the buildings to be more, as requested, was earth tones, or to blend in a little bit more. And then we also increased the landscape to have a lot more evergreens. I think we went from 4 evergreens to 14 and substituted some of the deciduous with that. Here's, once again, I'm an overly visual person, so I apologize if I'm boring you, everybody. I'll try to make this relatively quick. Here was the original design, and here's where we're at today. Once again, just trying to be a little bit more understanding, I guess, is maybe the appropriate word, of what was being requested of us. Most people, when they think of self-storage, they think of, chain link fence, a guy with a tattoo and a shotgun and a pit bull sitting behind a really crappy table. And I can tell you, it's not the case. This project will cost us over $10 million to build. And we're really proud of what we do put out there. Once again, here is what we originally had proposed. And honestly, we love these colors, but we would love to have a project be successful more. And so this is what we're coming back with. One more time, here's what we proposed. Here's where we're currently at. As you can see, a lot more greenery that'll be covered in snow at the moment. Color boards, it's walk through this relatively quickly. Once again, here's what we proposed. A lot of stuff stays similar, except for you can see we're going to change this green and this white to more of a beige color. We've added stone, and we still and we added a little bit more of a kind of a brown color to everything. Here is the with the solar. We were a solar company for a long time. This is what the carports will look like, and we've installed acres and acres of these throughout Nevada in our career. But at the end of the day, this is a project that we're very proud of. We're very excited. The town, the county, all the residents of the community are, and a massive desire to have more storage. And so at this moment, I can stop my share, I believe, and I think either answer any questions now or go answer questions when it's the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, Reed. I think we'll move forward unless anybody else on your team needs to add anything to the presentation you made.
At this moment, I think I've probably said more than enough. So thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll next call on Gardnerville Town Manager Eric Nielsen. Eric, please go ahead and have your presentation, and then we'll bring it back to the Planning Commission for questions amongst everyone else.
And then also in the audience is the vice chair of the current board, who will be the chair next year, Mike Henningsen. He is not here at the direction of the board. He is here on his own, but I did want to acknowledge his presence. So appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. First of all, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the town of Minden and Gardnerville produced a plan for prosperity in 2018. That plan for prosperity was approved by both town boards, the Planning Commission, and then it was also accepted by the Board of County Commissioners in 2018. Some of the items listed, the plan for prosperity listed a lot of implementation action items and lots of goals and policies for the town. Two of those were to prepare neighborhood planning, design, and development guidelines, standards for new neighborhoods, including addressing housing types, and prepare infill development and design guidelines for new development and renovation and adaptive use. When the plan for, when the Douglas County Master Plan was updated, specifically, it states the goals and policies for the Gardnerville Community Plan are contained in the 2018 Minden-Gardnerville Plan for Prosperity, which were developed guidelines for development unique to the towns. In the middle of this, in the county master plan, it states Douglas County will utilize the goals and policies contained in the Plan for Prosperity to the greatest extent possible. That is, the town of Gardnerville and the town of Minden Plan for Prosperity. The master plan for the towns is the town's Plan for Prosperity. The town developed design guidelines, which were adopted by the town board on December 9th for the town of Gardnerville. Minden's came about a year later. And then what happened was in August of 2020, there was a project that got submitted, and the town board asked the project to come back. They didn't feel it met the town design guidelines. And the board said, well, your advisory and community development just approved the plan, approved the project, didn't have them come back to the town. And I said, how does that happen? How are we in the master plan? How we develop these design guidelines, and it just gets left out, forgotten about? And I was told, oh, he didn't go to the Board of County Commissioners. So take him to the Board of County Commissioners, get them adopted, and then we'll enforce them. I personally thought that was an odd request. Town staff has, or county staff has plenty to enforce themselves. They do Title 20, they do the Mass Transportation Master Plan, the overall county master plan. I know they're updating Title 20 right now, which is good if you've ever read it. It's kind of like the Old Testament. There's about as many pages. Parts of it, you're not sure if it's applicable anymore. Parts of it contradict itself. So even knowing the Title 20 is a lot for county staff to use. I know I was the county engineer for 7 years, and frequently people would bring things up to me that were in code, and I'd say, man, I can't believe I didn't know that. I've been here, 5 years, 6 years, and I didn't know that. It's an incredibly unwieldy document. So I said, why would we add the county to require to know the town design guidelines as well, when the town and its board is completely capable of interpreting and understanding what they've approved? And particularly in this case, the planner who worked on this and did the staff report, he's not with the county anymore. He was here about 13 months. There is no way he knew Title 20, the master plan, the transportation plan, the town design guidelines. It's more than you can learn in the 13 months he was here. So anyway, now what happened was we did take these to the board. They were adopted by resolution. They're not the town design guidelines if we need your project, if we don't need your project, if you're a resident, if you're not a resident. These are the guidelines if you want to come into the town and develop. So I have all the respect for Sam Booth. I worked with him for a couple years. He's a great planner. He is wrong about what he said about the design guidelines. There is no confusion. I have a portion of my design guidelines. The design guidelines are broken down into 6 parts. The first is the overarching design guidelines. They apply to any project within the town. The second part is the downtown Gardnerville design guidelines. Things along Main Street, historic Main Street, from Millerville down to about the S-curve, looks different than anything else that's developed in the town, and those have unique design guidelines. There are also traditional neighborhoods. Those are the areas east of 395, Douglas Avenue. Those homes look different than the new neighborhoods, the stuff on the west side of 395, which is like Chichester and Stoddard Estates. We do have commercial corridors and employment areas, and then there's a section on community facilities, which are for any town projects or utility companies. So you can actually have a project that has is encumbered by 3 different areas in the design guidelines. So there are broken down in the commercial corridors and employment areas. There are special areas for if you're up in Millerville, if you're around Heritage Park, it looks different. The commercial quad is Smith's and Rayleigh's, Walgreens, that looks different. And then if you're in the South Gateway by Walmart and Gardner and the Carson Valley Medical Center, you're going to look a little bit different. So just in the design guidelines, I'm going to read 3 sections. It says, do the guidelines apply to your project? If your project falls within Gardnerville, then they apply, except if the project is exempt from development review. Exempt projects include interior renovations, single-family homes not requiring subdivision, and minor renovations. What sections apply? The guideline includes overall guidelines that apply to every project and sub-area guidelines that provide criteria for distinct districts. For example, if your project is located in Old Town, you would use Section 1, overall planning goals, and Section 2, downtown design guidelines. And this is where Sam made his error, and it's a very critical error. Overall design guidelines, the whole town. This section, selection of materials and finishes should support architectural and massing concepts for projects. Architecture within each project should use a palette of materials that convey an image of quality and durability. Certain materials have an inherently inexpensive or insubstantial quality. These materials should not be used in new construction or renovation. Walls, vinyl, metal, plywood, T111 siding, masonite, or other sheet materials. These are not allowed anywhere in Gardnerville. Sam points out another section, which was under the commercial corridors and employment areas, where it listed other materials which were not approved. I remember fake stone. Fake stone's not allowed in commercial. It is allowed in residential, which is why it's not allowed, which is why that's not located in the overall overarching design guidelines, but metal is. Metal is not allowed anywhere, but other types of materials could be allowed in residential, but not in commercial, or in commercial and not residential. So I'm sorry, but that is a mistake. And that is why I'm uncomfortable with the county telling the town what their design guidelines mean. So this particular project, the Pine Nut Self-Storage in South Gateway area, is in one of these character districts. It is therefore required to comply with 3 sections of the town's guidelines. The overall arching guidelines, which prohibit metal, the South Gateway guidelines, and the new commercial industrial building guidelines. I'll skip the zoning. Sam went over that. The site plan's been discussed. So in these design guidelines, again, the overarching design guidelines state that we don't allow metal. The applicant has proposed metal buildings. And then in the new office and industrial buildings, for instance, Sam says, well, you could make the argument that these buildings are an extension of a wall, okay? Walls should be architectural concrete block, use cement, plaster finish, or otherwise reflect the design and materials of the building. Sam said, well, they do reflect the materials of the building because they're metal and the buildings are metal. No, metal is not allowed. So therefore the walls cannot be metal. They have to be concrete block, cement, plaster finish, or if there was another kind, wood wall or whatever that was allowed, it could be extended in that manner. Design guidelines specifically state, and these are not critical, this isn't the big issue, it's a minor issue, but poorly proportioned tacked on elements that do not fit the building's character are discouraged. Window glass should be lightly tinted or clear, reflective, and very deeply tinted glass are discouraged. They're putting on fake decorative tinted windows. That doesn't match, over the metal. These are the large scale, blank walls. It's hard to read at this scale, but fake windows, tinted glass, vertical metal, green, vertical metal, white, flat metal, white, horizontal metal, charcoal, more of the same. I include this. The applicant said we wanted, in their justification, they said we wanted to create a project that was fresh, modern, and eye-catching. And I agree they've done that. The town design guidelines say we expect new investment to respect traditions and uniqueness, to be planned and designed as an extension of the existing town. Big metal buildings, storage facilities, that's not an extension of the existing town. And to reflect aspirations for lasting quality places and buildings. And I bring this slide up, the lower left, when I worked for community development, Sonic came in, the Sonic that's in Minden. And they said, hey, we want something fresh and modern. We want it to light up the night sky. We want you to see the menus when you hit State Route 88. And this is what we're going to propose on the left. And community development said, no, that doesn't blend in with the town. We're sorry, we don't want something eye-catching and modern. We want something that meets the county code, and what you got was the Sonic to the right. I think that this just shows the applicant is not looking for the same goals that the town is looking for. So how this process has gone forth is we met with the applicant for a pre-application meeting back in April. We provided their written comments. We provided them the town design guidelines so they could revise their project to conform to the town. I always, when I was in community development, I never liked pre-application meetings. I always felt like it was the crush your dream meeting. People come in, a lot of them, and basically they don't have the correct zoning. So their project, they realize, okay, this project's not going to happen. A lot of times the use isn't even considered in code. For instance, we've had indoor gun ranges, we've had solar farms, things that the code doesn't even consider. So it's like, man, before you guys come forward, we got a lot of work to do on the code side. And then a lot of times the applicants will find out about required off-site improvements, road improvements, street improvements that make the project expensive. And that's fine. The pre-application meeting is a time for you to decide if you can move forward and meet the design guidelines and county code. And I'll note, in this I said, yeah, the town design guidelines, the overarching guidelines don't allow metal. And Lorenzo, who was the planner, said, oh, I like metal. I think it looks great. I said, thanks. Appreciate your personal opinion on metal here when I'm giving the design guidelines for the town. So after the, and one thing the public always gets upset about, and especially in front of the county commissioners, they always say, oh, community development, they approve everything. They don't realize, you know, a lot of projects have been weeded out at the pre-application meeting. It never makes it to public hearing, and that's okay. We give the applicant the requirements so they can decide if it's worth their time or not. In June, the applicant requested to meet with me, and he came in and he basically said, hey, I can't meet your design guidelines. It doesn't pencil, but your community needs the project, so you should approve it. You should support it. I said, no, that's not how it works. That's not how development works. The development is, here are the rules to come in and develop. I can't support anything that doesn't meet our design guidelines. And they made a submittal in October for major design review, and they had made minimal changes. They changed from chain link fence on one side to a wrought iron, which looked better. But they really made no changes. And I told them, look, this is going to be a recommendation for hard denial. This doesn't meet the design guidelines, so that's fine. We'll just go in front of the town board and take our chances. So it was presented to the town board. The town board issued a recommendation of denial. And I will say, I've been the town manager for 2.5 years. It is the first outright recommendation of denial the town board has issued in 2.5 years. They've had 2 others. They said, hey, make some changes and come back. But this is the first one that they've just denied. Mr. Booth's comments about what the town board said, hey, we need to look at our design guidelines. That's not under consideration. The guidelines are what they are today for the submittal. I'm sure the design guidelines will look different in 2 years, 5 years. And if we change them, then the game changes, but we're not changing them now. And I did speak with the chair and the town board, and at this time, there is no proposed changes to the design guidelines. What we have in place and what is required of this project is what will be in place for the near term anyway. The main reason the applicant has said they cannot meet the design guidelines is because of cost. I just want to note in the county code, you cannot request a variance to the master plan, which the town design guidelines are, on the basis of economic hardship. The Douglas County Design Criteria and Improvement Standards say conditions which are created by improper site planning, i.e. lack of space allocations, financial hardship shall not be considered grounds for variance. And when this project came to the town board, the town attorney told the town board, look, cost is not a reason to deviate from design standards or regulations. I would caution you not to base the decision based on cost. So it was discussed why the town board recommended denial. And I will say the town design guidelines are not in conflict with county code. The town design guidelines would be conflict with county code if we wanted to approve something that code prohibited. If you're just going to say there's a conflict, we set higher standards, that doesn't mean it's in conflict. Basically, I think if you approve this, you'd be stating for the record and for precedence, hey, the town design guidelines are essentially worthless because we just go by county code anyway, because there really isn't any conflict. We always try to approve projects. We usually try to condition them. Hey, this is approved based on these conditions. This one was so far out of the realm, there was no way to condition it to approve. I kind of gave the applicant, I said, look, I understand if you can't meet the design guidelines, if it doesn't pencil, you can't build it. That's fine. Why don't you go 1,400 feet away out of the town? There's industrial zone property at Sawmill. There's industrial zone property at the airport in Johnson Lane that's completely out of the town. And then you don't have to meet the town design guidelines. You can build just to county code. Won't be as expensive for you. You can do that. There's also the option to, adjust the current design to meet the design guidelines, and then, hey, you're welcome. Like I said, the town board, they had no problem with the use. They recognize self-storage is underserved. I think they would welcome it with open arms. And the other option is just to cancel it, just to walk and say, you know what, you're right, it's too expensive, it doesn't pencil here, we'll go somewhere else. So, I would like one request from the Planning Commission. I do not want the new design to be considered. That was not the submittal. The town board hasn't reviewed it. I haven't looked at it. The last thing I think we want to do as planning commissioners or county commissioners anywhere is to pick up a review and start ad hocing and on-the-fly review of a project. It's not what's been submitted. I think if the applicant really felt that their project met the design guidelines, that they would have asked me to look at it and submit a letter recommendation to the Planning Commission. So I would approve it to be, I would appreciate, and again, the planning commission has wide discretion, but I would appreciate that the project be approved or denied based on what was submitted. And just to state, on November 18th, not that I even knew it was on the radar, but we did have another pre-application meeting with a self-storage who is proposing to build right here where I've put the arrow in this other industrial zone project. And they had a architect, Jordan Architecture was the guy's name, and he wins awards designing self-storage, which I didn't even know they gave out, but they do. He directed us to his website. He had 15 that he was proud of. 10 of them, I think, would be off-the-shelf approvals for the town. The other ones needed some tweaking, but would probably be 80% submitted or approved. So it can be done. They're out there. And with that, I can take any questions or turn it back to the county.
Thank you very much, Eric. I recall you did say that Mike Henningsen was there with you, and I would like to offer him an opportunity to speak if he would like to. If not, we can move forward with questions and comments from the Planning Commission.
Hello, this is Mike Henningsen. I guess this is working. Mike Henningsen, on behalf of the town board. Again, as the attorney said, I'm speaking only for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board. This project, and I think the board, and again, I'm speaking for myself, I felt this project is a very good project. I think it's needed in the community. I don't have any problem with the concept at all. The problem that we had was that Eric met with the gentleman and Butch and asked them he had some concerns about the design guidelines and asked him to come in several times prior to coming to the board. And there was no effort whatsoever to consider changes at all. And we as a board believe the design guidelines are good. When it comes to metal, that does get a little bit touchy because there's a lot of buildings that are made out of metal, and that doesn't instantly guarantee they're poor quality or anything else. But the design guidelines do call out to avoid, if at all possible, the use of metal. Our approach, or my approach, is that there are ways to make a building much more aesthetically pleasing and of a higher quality standards. That's not what the design guidelines call out, but I do personally believe that there are ways to make a metal building much more substantially looking. But there was absolutely no effort on their part, and when we asked that, and I personally asked that, have you made any efforts at all to try and alter your design prior to coming to this board? And basically the answer was, no, here's what it is. This is what we do. It's sort of a cookie cutter design that I looked on their projects in Reno and Oregon and California. It's sort of a cookie cutter design. They change colors and a few things, but it's pretty much a cookie cutter type design, and that's fine. But one of the reasons Douglas County is expensive and is considered the best of the best is because we do stand up for high quality. We do stand up for not just projects that can get built anywhere. We do have pride in our designs, in our presentations, and that was our question to them: is have you made any effort to meet with Eric and bring back some alternatives? Talk about some possible improvements, changes? No, none at all. And so we felt like they had no room for dealing with us. Either you accept it or we're going to the Planning Commission and we'll take our chances there. And that was our primary, or my primary reason for voting it down, was because there was no give or take, no compromise. It was, here it is. You like it, either you approve it or we're going to the Planning Commission. So we said, fine. We voted down. So that's my input. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. We appreciate your coming here today, and we appreciate your comments. Before we go back to questions or comments from the members of the Planning Commission, I would like to make a disclosure. I did receive a phone call from the property owner, Butch Perry, and I also had a phone conversation with the Gardnerville town manager, Eric Nielsen. We had a brief discussion on the project, but none of the information that we discussed was anything that was other than is in the materials today. But I did want to disclose that I talked with both of those individuals prior to this meeting. I would open it up to members of the Planning Commission at this point for questions, and perhaps we could start with members of the Planning Commission who are present at the meeting location, and then move to the other members of the Planning Commission on Zoom.
Mr. Chairman, before we get going, if you would allow me, I need to disclose that I also spoke with Mr. Perry, and nothing that he said is going to impact my decision today. And when I say nothing that he said, I'm talking about the telephone call. I am taking in everything that everybody's saying today.
Thank you very much, Mark. Any other disclosures from members of the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chairman, Member Klutz, for the record, I also had a phone conversation with Mr. Perry. It was brief, and nothing that was discussed in that call is any different than the information that's in front of us today.
Thank you very much, Bryce. Other disclosures before we move to questions or comments from member of the Planning Commission?
Mr. Chair, I
Maureen.
had a call from Mr. Nielsen, and it was very brief. We did not discuss the project. It was a brief conversation about process, and it will not influence my decision one way or the other.
Thank you, Maureen.
Mr. Chair, Brian Olin.
Yes.
I too had phone calls from Mr. Perry. However, I did not get a chance to speak with him. And I did take a phone call from Eric Nielsen, and we just, like Maureen said, discussed the procedure between the county and the towns. Nothing that would impact our decision today.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to go ahead with the questions that people have of any of the individuals making a presentation. Members of the Planning Commission can just identify who they would like to answer the question if they want to pose a question to all of the individuals. And then again, I would ask as you are responding, if you could please state your name for the record so that we can have a good transcribed minutes and records of the discussion. So I'll turn it over to anybody who is present at the meeting location for questions for the staff or the applicant or the town of Gardnerville.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, Bryce Klutz for the record.
Yes, go ahead, Bryce.
So my first question is for Mr. Nielsen. Referring back to the town of Gardnerville guidelines, this has come up a couple times today. Certain materials have an inherently inexpensive or insubstantial quality. These materials should not be used in new construction or renovation. How is inexpensive or insubstantial defined?
Or inexpensive is defined. But I think the whole purpose of the town design guidelines was that building within the towns would look different than if you build in Ruinstroth or build in Johnson Lane, for instance, or down in Topaz. So it listed materials that that the architect who helped prepare the design guidelines felt were not of substantial or high quality, and those materials were included.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nielsen. And just to further that is, and I respect the fact that there's some concern about whether the applicant came back in, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. Is it the buildings or the shade structures where metal is a concern, or is it both?
So one thing that I told the applicant that I was happy to bend on, I said, look, what's on the interior project, the public doesn't see. I could care less what you build that out of. So, you know, I said that if you build the interior of your project metal, that doesn't impact anybody, but the exterior had to be the higher quality metals, which, people say, work with them, be flexible. That's flexible. That's probably, I don't know what it is, 60, 70% of the construction is on the interior of the site. And if that's metal, it doesn't impact the public or the town, how it looks.
Did I understand you correctly? You just said that it needed to be a higher quality metal?
No, I just said the interior of the site, it wasn't critical what they build it out of, really, because no one sees it. It's the exterior, what the public sees along the roadways from adjacent properties that needed to meet, in my opinion, the guidelines specifically for the materials.
So do the guidelines differentiate between interior and exterior, or is that just a judgment call on your part?
They do not, the guidelines state all, but I told them I thought that would be a good way to work with them, and the town board would be amenable to that, to make it more palatable to them, that we could recommend that.
And so with respect to a different material on the exterior, you had mentioned a different project that may be before the town. What is the exterior materials being used in that particular project?
Well, generally, in the town for industrial or commercial buildings, materials that would be permitted is stucco, actual stone, real stone veneer, masonry, wood. Those are approvable materials on the exterior.
Would concrete be an approved material?
Yes, that is. And split face block, tilt up concrete, things of those nature are approvable, yes.
So coming back to when metal, and I don't remember when metal was excluded. I don't know if that was 5 years ago, 20 years ago, or what have you.
It's just been 2 years, sir.
2 years?
Yeah, it was adopted in December of 2019.
And going back to the record, if you have, what was the intent of excluding metal? What kind of metal? Corrugated metal, panelized metal?
From the walls?
It's pretty vague. I guess that's the point.
Vague.
It just says metal.
It does just say metal.
It's
so
like,
yes.
well, there's different types of wood. You can have some very expensive stain treated cedar, and you could have a raw 2x6. It's vague, so I'm just trying to get some context of when that was done. What was the intent of excluding metal as a material?
Again, to eliminate, to make the architecture and the materials higher quality, to encourage more traditional type materials that have been used in the town, the masonry, the wood, stucco. So yeah, it's only been 2 years. It hasn't been long, but that's when it was put in place.
I think that goes back to my initial concern is who defines higher quality. There are some incredibly high quality metal materials. I'd argue just as high quality and durability as concrete or masonry. And then what defines inexpensive? I mean, the cost of steel is up 150% over the last couple of years. I'd argue it's probably more expensive than any of those other materials. So how is that defined?
It's not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bryce. Other members of the Planning Commission who are in the meeting room would like to ask questions or make comments?
Yes. Mark, for the record, and this question's for Eric. So, Eric, have you allowed any metal in the town of Gardnerville since these design guidelines have been adopted?
The only one that's been allowed, that's been approved, is at the corner of Industrial Way and 395, the building that burned down, the Joe Benigno building that burned down. They approached the town board and they requested, they had two options. One was a complete metal building, and one was a building that had a metal shop in the back, but the front had stone veneer, wood, and was higher quality. And there was four options: required to meet the design guidelines, allow the option with the metal in the back and the upgraded front. The applicant wanted to do complete metal, and the other option was to deny it. Based on the fact that the existing building had burned down and it did not meet the design guidelines whatsoever, the town board felt that the new one was an improvement in its location and its architecture. They did not allow the complete metal design, but they allowed the metal shop at the rear of the building. So that is the only one that has been approved since the new design guidelines went into effect.
Okay, so for a follow-up question, has the town of Gardnerville done anything to improve the look of their building?
Well, it doesn't reply retroactive.
I know that, but the town of Gardnerville's warehouse or whatever you call it?
Our solid waste building? No, but like I said, if we reconstructed it, we would meet the design guidelines, but that building was built long before the design guidelines were contemplated.
Okay, and my final question for you, Eric, is you said that there is no plan to revisit the design guidelines that you're aware of. But
Correct.
yet we have Mr. Miller and Mr. Higuera that both said, you know, we need to look at these. We believe that we thought that the guidelines were going to end at the Village Motel, but apparently it's entirely within Gardnerville. So I guess if they would have to ask you to get it on your agenda.
So what happened was, after those comments were made, I went on a field trip with the chair,
Okay.
showed him examples, and I said, I think the correct design guidelines are in place. And he said, I agree. The correct design guidelines are in place. So at the last town board meeting, I said, I've met with the chair. The correct design guidelines are in place. I said, any town board member can have anything put on the agenda. I said, if you want that put on the agenda, let me know and we will put it on. And none of them at that time spoke up to have it re-agendized.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Mark. Maureen or Brian, any questions or comments at this point?
Yeah, Brian Olin for the record. I think we have somebody else here was at the town of Gardnerville that participated in the process, maybe can help. You know, we had the town of Minden and I think it was the town of Gardnerville, and Mr. Henning, I believe, was in a meeting with some sort of consultant when we were putting those design things together to, I think, do the entire town of Prosperity plan. Was it not that time, Tom, about when you guys were contemplating these, or because it was mid between you and Eric, I believe.
Tom Dallaire for the record, Community Development Director. Yeah, the plan for prosperity is what we updated while I was at the town. We had a task, I believe, in the plan to create these guidelines, and that's when about the time when I departed, and Eric took over as manager.
If I may, Eric Nielsen for the record, the contract was already signed to update the guidelines when I joined on. They were already in the works. So yeah, it was right between the time Tom left and I went over there that they were in the works.
So at the meeting that I was at, I remember the Gardnerville Town Board, you know, making a comment that I wasn't exactly, you know, the most in favor of, is this is our opportunity to limit development further than what the county already said. And while I don't agree with that comment, I do believe that the town has the opportunity to regulate within their boundary, and we as the Board of County Commissioners, per the resolution I can see, you know, allowed them to do so. And I think they have created, you know, though metal may be something some people prefer versus not, I think it's up to them to make the rules within their area. And they created a forward-looking document like everything else in the county, not looking backwards at what was already created. We got the storage unit on the north end of town. I don't exactly like seeing through that gate and seeing those, you know, metal storage buildings as I exit the town. Store alls in in the Gardnerville Ranchos by us again, metal buildings again. So do we move forward or do we go backwards? And I think, you know, I like the criteria that they've established, and I like allowing them to regulate their own criteria. And as the county not coming back and telling them that they can't do that. So I kind of do agree a little bit with Eric in that, you know, they've created the guidelines and, you know, forward, they're not going to allow this. So if they're going to apply those, you know, consistently, I think we should let them.
Thank you, Brian. Maureen, any questions or comments at this point?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, and I don't know if Eric can answer them or if they have to go to staff. One of them, I noticed in one of the photos that was presented to us of the change in the trees, there were photos of the switch in the number of deciduous trees, and it showed evergreens in the planter strip. And what concerned me is evergreens get very large. And my concern is with time as it goes by, the evergreens will rip up the sidewalk. So would those be?
If I may.
Yes.
Madam Casey, it's Eric Nielsen for the record. Those roads are both maintained by the county, not the town, so I assume the sidewalk is as well. So the roots of the evergreen wouldn't be a concern, for the town. I don't know if county staff wishes to discuss that.
This is Reed Hamilton, the applicant. Can I chime into that?
Reed, if you can hold on and let Sam Booth make a direct comment to Maureen, and then yes, you can make a follow-on comment.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sam Booth for the record. I would just state that I had that proposed condition in there. But we have landscaping standards. We have standards for the type of landscaping that are planted in which locations, and they would be subject to those. But we haven't seen that revised site plan for that, so they would be conditioned to submit that back to us, and we'd make sure that it meets the county code requirements for that. I didn't catch that in the elevations, but we'd review it against the code standard for it.
Thank you, Sam. Mr. Hamilton, would you like to also respond?
Sure, Reed Hamilton for the record. Just for clarification, the setbacks are approximately somewhere between 15 to 20 feet from the sidewalk, the landscape buffer. So hopefully that will give us ample room to not have any cracking of sidewalks or street.
Thank you. Back to you, Maureen.
Okay. When I'm looking over the minutes for the Gardnerville town meeting, there is a representative, a Mr. Tom, and I don't know if he is the sole person speaking for the applicant or if he was just one of the people speaking for the applicant. And he speaks about, quote, each market dictates what the project costs can handle. In a market where the rents are lower compared to a project in the Bay Area where rents are 3 or 4 times as much for the same unit, that dictates the amount we can spend on designing and building the project. In this area, these were the materials that fit. High quality metal that is long lasting, easy maintenance, vandalism or graffiti can be repaired quickly, end quote. And we don't have a problem with vandalism or graffiti in this area. And we were told by Mr. Hamilton that demand is very high in Gardnerville. And I believe that what is being said is that we can have a high quality project here with high quality materials, and that we can have something that looks very good and have rents that will pay for recovery of the materials and still meet Title 20 and the Gardnerville standards. So I guess why I'm a little bit confused and a little bit conflicted is I think at the very least this project should have been reviewed with county staff and with staff, Eric or whomever from the town of Gardnerville, when the applicant submitted their reviewed project prior to it coming to the Planning Commission. At the very least, it should have been reviewed by both. And I get a little bit unhappy when it's submitted at the very last minute and staff doesn't have the full amount of time to review things. And I don't think it's fair to staff. It's not fair to us. It's not fair in this instance to the town, be it Minden or Gardnerville. So that's where my conflict comes from. Thank you.
Once again,
Thank
this
you, Maureen.
Reed Hamilton.
Go ahead, Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, so I would like to comment on that. I feel like there's been some statements made here in the last 30 or 40 minutes that haven't 100% either been accurate or fairly representative. pertaining the redesign for what we presented in the packet. I have, email evidence where I went back to Eric and said, hey, I understand that we got a 5-0 vote. What we've been doing along the whole time is working with the county to meet their guidelines and working to design the project to what we've been told. Now, when I went back to Eric after the 5-0 vote, I said, we would like to get on another agenda. I believe it was the December 7th agenda. And Eric said, look, man, basically, if you don't completely redesign the project to the way we want it, it's not going to get on the agenda. And that was terribly frustrating. And so that's when we made the decision to come to this meeting. Obviously, as a developer, getting in front of boards is quite terrifying because a lot of different things can happen. So we would have much preferred to go back to the town and show them the design that we presented most recently with the change of colors, the stone and the trees. And if you review the minutes from the town meeting, those were all the requests, not all of them, but a healthy chunk of them, definitely more than halfway. And so that's one comment that I'd like to make. And then there was another gentleman, Mike, who spoke from the town, who said that he reviewed all of our projects and this is pretty much cookie cutter. This is actually the first single story project that we've ever built. Everything we've done is 3 stories to 5 stories, or 3 stories to 4 stories, or conversions where we take old Kmart's and convert them. And so I've been through this process a lot of times and met with a lot of cities and a lot of towns. And we really try to be as patient as we can be and communicate. In any relationship that's going to be successful, it comes down to communication. And this has been a pretty unique process. We've really, really enjoyed working with the county and working with Lorenzo and Sam and trying to follow along with the guidelines that are in place there. We haven't had nearly as much luck just on a communication basis with the town. And when we got the 5-0 vote, we tried to get back in front of them, and it was abundantly clear that was not an option. And so we've spent somewhere between $250,000 to $300,000 in this new design to try to create something that is very high quality, that will last for a long time. And so those are just a couple of statements that I would like to make. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to individuals on Zoom now. Nick or Christy, either of you want to start with questions or comments?
I'll chime in. This is Nick Meyer. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good. Nick, go ahead.
Good. A couple of points, and I want to kind of follow the thread that Brian started here. I think it's very important that we support our towns and their guidelines. These guidelines were developed by the towns themselves. They were approved in a resolution by the Board of County Commissioners. There's no ambiguity in terms of the materials that they approve or they disapprove. So I don't think it's the role of the Planning Commission to try and renegotiate or negotiate design guidelines that have already been approved. So I think we need to support the town of Gardnerville in this instance. And the other point that Eric brought forward, which I think is very important, is this project is at the very southern end of Gardnerville. Now, this developer could easily move to the industrial area that is off Sawmill. I live very near this proposed development. They could very easily move to the industrial area off Sawmill, and they would have no requirements to meet any of the guidelines of Gardnerville. Or they could move to the airport, where a storage facility would be no problem, meet the county guidelines. So I think it's just a bad idea to try to overrule the town of Gardnerville, who knows their guidelines very specifically with this particular project. So that's my position at this point.
Thank you very much, Nick. Christy, any comments or questions right now?
I think just some comments. I think anytime we try and hypothesize and say they're going to be fully rented so they can pay a higher rent, or they could just move anywhere, the amount of work that goes into site selection is incredible. By the time we get something, what developers have gone through to secure the land, to do the due diligence, there's so much that you don't even see. So I think it's to say, oh, they could just move to this area. There's a lot more to that. Same thing, metal buildings. I've done a lot of metal building development over the years. It is a process to get jurisdictions to understand that metal buildings are not what we think of metal buildings. They're actually a very solid structure and quite earthquake resistant. So I think changing the framework around metal buildings is a huge battle with most jurisdictions. In the case of this overall, I think I tend to, unfortunately, towards Nick and Brian in the sense that the town has created their standards. They've done what they can to get their standards approved to where they can have authority to implement them, whether we agree with them or not. So I think I would kind of lean in that general direction on this one.
Thank you very much, Christy. I have a couple of comments and then a question or two. I did review the supplemental materials that included the town of Gardnerville's minutes and the emails that were exchanged, I guess, between Mr. Hamilton and Eric Nielsen. And I found them very instructive for many of the points that were made previously about the design standards. I do think the town of Gardnerville was done a very serious injustice. I don't think the communication was as good as it could have been. You started on this in April with the pre-application. Eric was pretty clear on what he wanted. You decided to go in another direction, which is obviously your right to go, but it took till November 2nd that you were before the town board. And that's a long period of time to not try and work with a town to come up with something acceptable. I do think Brian made some very good points. Nick made some very good points too. We have to respect the towns. We want to respect the towns. And that's a very important part of good community relations, good relations between the towns and community development and between the county. I am concerned from the standpoint that Eric has asked us to only consider the original submission, and I think that's problematic. I agree with Maureen. The modified materials that you've submitted, the applicant has submitted, have come in at the last minute. I do know that Sam Booth works very diligently to review things. I have every confidence in his ability to make sure that whatever comes forward is acceptable. I know Tom Dallaire is an excellent engineer and reviewer as well. So I do think we have to respect the fact that the applicant would like to modify and like to change what was rejected 5-0 by the towns. So I think that's an important consideration, that this is new material. They've changed things. They've made things better, in my opinion. And those were not considered by the town. So we have a different proposal before us. And I think it's incumbent upon us to judge that proposal. I also want to say that I do think Bryce made some very good points about the types of materials. It's just inconceivable to me that someone would look at a concrete block building and say that looks better than expensive metal construction. We're in a modern world now. You don't have a lot of cinder block, concrete block that looks very good. So those are just some of the observations that I have at this point. I would like to ask Mr. Hamilton and Sam Booth. I don't know if you're at the at the workstation there, or Mr. Hamilton, whether you were aware of the new proposed condition that Sam Booth has added to the approval that we would consider, which was C3, and I can paraphrase it. And Sam, if you want to put it up on the screen so we can have Mr. Hamilton answer specifically. It's a condition that you must submit revised plans prior to issuance of a building permit. And I would like to ask you to give your specific answer if that condition is acceptable to you at this point.
For the record, this is Reed Hamilton. Yes, we're aware of that condition and it is acceptable to us.
Okay, thank you. I don't think I have any other questions or comments at this point. We can turn back to other members of the Planning Commission if they want to come up with other things that they would like to ask. If not, we can move to public comment before we bring it back for a motion, discussion, and action. Anybody else on the Planning Commission want to jump in with follow-up questions or things that they would like to get on the record before we move to public comment?
Mr. Chairman, I would if I could. Bryce Klutz
Yeah.
for the record.
Go ahead, Bryce.
So a follow-up question for Mr. Nielsen. Is it true that Meadow has been kind of a contentious item that's come up in prior town board meetings with respect to development in the past?
It has.
So I guess I'm concerned with, and I heard it, and I don't want to overcharacterize this or mischaracterize your statement, that it seemed that you were adamant that revisiting the guidelines just isn't on the table. Correct. Even though this has been, it appears to be problematic in terms of development review within the town. You have members of your town board who have expressed the desire and the need to better understand or revisit the guidelines. And so, although I don't feel that, I don't like being in a position where the county has to trump what the town does. I mean, I'm a resident of Gardnerville. I respect the town board of Gardnerville. I respect you as the town manager. I think you guys should have your autonomy, and I don't like being in this position. The challenge that I have, though, is that I'm also disappointed that there's a problem here that's not being addressed. And so, to me, it doesn't appear it's going to be the last time it comes before you or the town board, and it's probably not going to be the last time it comes back before us unless there's a willingness to address the elephant in the room, which is that it appears to be a judgment that metal is an inexpensive or less substantial quality than some other material. And I think I would just agree to disagree on that. And so that's a concern for me. I want to support the town. But I feel like you're digging your heels in and saying, well, I just don't agree, and I've talked to my board, and I've got them on the same page that we're just not going to revisit this, and that's it.
Every guideline is a judgment call, and no one is going to agree with every guideline 100%. So what you do is you adopt what's right for your community, and if the town board wants to change it, they're welcome to. At this point, they haven't had any desire to change that. If it changes in a year, in 6 months, in 5 years, then development can meet those guidelines. But no one agrees on every design guideline. That's impossible.
Well, I think I would disagree with you that there hasn't been an expressed desire to revisit them. Now, whether they've been brought up as an agenda item, I think that would be a better characterization of the town board, that they have not brought this up. But the fact that they haven't addressed that this is a challenge and something that they'd like to revisit, the meeting minutes would suggest otherwise.
No, at the December 7th board meeting, I asked if anyone wanted to put this on a future agenda, and at the time, none of them asked for it to be on a future agenda.
Mr. Chair?
Sam Taylor, yes.
Yeah. Sam Taylor from the Douglas County DAs for the record. I just wanted to remind the Planning Commission that whenever they're making a decision on this particular issue, they need to ensure that they're looking at 2614040, the findings relative to a design review. And whatever the vote turns out to be, one way or another, if you could substantiate how it meets the findings or it does not meet the findings whenever you're making your motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam Taylor. I always want to remind people of that too. And the findings, again, for everybody's record, are on packet page 62. And there are 6 of them, I believe, that continue all the way over to packet page 65. And then also the conditions are on packet page 65 through 71. So we can discuss those more at the appropriate time. Other questions or comments from members of the Planning Commission before we go to public comment?
Mr. Chair, Brian Olin.
Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
So, I mean, the metal argument aside, from what I'm hearing from the developer is that this only pencils if we use this material. To me, that says we need a cheaper material. And I understand, Bryce, you believe that some metal is going to be strong, it's going to be better, it's going to look better. But what I'm seeing here in their site plans and even the new drawings they show is a flat white metal on the side of a building. Whether you make it beige, brown, doesn't matter. It's just going to be a flat metal, no windows, and there's not even going to be a wall in front of it, so we don't have to see the flat white metal side of this building. I've seen the indoor storage facilities, 2-story, maybe some of the 3-story these people have built. And they have, concrete exteriors, all the metal's inside, we can't see it from the outside. So I appreciate Eric early in the process identifying to the developer that this was an issue, saying, I have an issue with this and we do not believe it will meet the criteria. I think it was the developer's opportunity to come forward and really work with them, and he did not work with the town. If we want to encourage developers to stop working with the towns, just come to the county. Let's approve what the developer's doing here. But I think instead we should support the towns and their ability to regulate on their own design criteria. So, again, I think it points back to the developer had every opportunity to make this right and did nothing, I think, to make it right. And even these new designs still have flat-sided white metal or beige metal on these sides. So I still don't think they're really working with them. And I think it's only fair that if there's new design, that the town get to see it and it not go through the county to bypass going back to the town, the person who's saying no. Essentially, they're trying to bypass going back through the town board again because they know they're going to get a same no because they didn't do anything other than add brick in a single section. So, what I'm seeing is they aren't trying to work with the town, and the town's the one that gets to say yes or no. We, the county, should allow the town to say yes or no. So I can't be in favor of, allowing this to walk around them.
Thank you, Brian. Anything else from members of the Planning Commission, or we'll go to public comment?
Can I, Eric Nielsen, Mr. Walter, could I make one comment, please?
Yes, you may.
I wanted to just discuss the item that Reed brought up about coming back to the town board and being asked to be placed on the agenda again. As you can see, he asked me on November 8th or November 10th to come back to the town board. And I had to have I told him, well, I guess we could get it, if you get me everything by the 18th, we could get it back on. But his assumption or statement that, the landscaping's half of it, no, that's not a part of it at all, really. Landscaping is easy. If it was a landscape issue with the town board, we would have just approved it with the condition to provide better landscaping. That's easy. The motion by the town board was to deny the major design review for the new self-storage facility located at 1608 Pine Nut Road as presented due to its incompatibility with the adopted Town of Gardnerville design guidelines, period. That's it. Not redo the landscaping than it was. However, I would like to encourage you to meet with Eric, look at the design guidelines and look for some compromise. Take into account some ideas we talked about with Joe and see if you can't come up with something that is a compromise and then come back. So when he wants to come on the 10th and a week later be on the town design on the agenda again, I haven't met with him. I haven't looked for compromise. I haven't seen a revised design. I didn't see how that would be possible in 8 days without even asking me about it, to come back to the town with a design that meets it. That's why I said, I don't think you can come back in time. Look, when they're ready and they have a design that can be supported, I'm happy to get it back on the town board agenda and happy to move forward with it because we'd like to see something built. But I didn't see that happening in 8 days, and it wasn't because of the landscaping.
Thank you, Eric. Reed, would you like to have a brief response?
Yeah, it'll be really brief. at the end of the day, I don't think Eric and I see eye to eye, or we just don't communicate well when it comes to how things have happened in the past. To say that we haven't tried to work with, or we're trying to skirt around, we've tried to make multiple efforts to do what we believe is the right thing, and a lot of times by the guidance of working with the county. So our communication is not in sync at the moment. You're muted.
Thank you. Let's go to public comment now, and then we can come back to the board. We can discuss further. We can have a motion, and then we'll see where we wind up. Colleen, you can ask for public comment on Zoom, and Michelle, if there's anyone in the room that would like to offer public comment, whoever wants to stand up or speak first, we'll leave it to the individuals for public comment. I see somebody in the room, so why don't we go with the meeting room public comment first, and then we'll do Zoom second. If you would state your name, and then you can make your public comment, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan St. John. Afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. I do not have a dog in this hunt. I'm really observing because of my interest in what this commission does and what's important to the towns and the county. It's a tough position to be in. Hearing your comments about what you may feel if you were the town council making the guidelines versus do you really want to override them or not? It's a very tough situation, and I know it's a hard one you've grappled with. I would just like to leave you with one thought. I've developed metal buildings. In fact, I've developed one with a company represented by one of the commissioners. And obviously, it was fine. But that's not the point. That's not my concern. My concern is the relationship between the towns and the county. In my 20 plus years in leadership in local government, most of it right here in Carson City County and Washoe County, there's just too many times I've observed where these little wedges get driven between the relationships between a town board, a district board, a county board, a city board, and then conflict occurs as opposed to respecting each agency for their own mission and their own scope. There's a long-standing tradition, not just in our nation, but in the world. It's called self-determination. We know it as states' rights. No state wants to be overturned by the federal government. No county wants to be overturned by the state, and no city or district wants to be overturned by the county. And so we try to imbue that principle of self-determination. Now, you're also in a situation where you are an appeals board. If Mendon or Gardnerville makes a finding and then it comes here, in a sense, you are put in that awkward situation of having to decide whether you disagree with what that town board did. And therefore, I know it's a very, very tough situation. Again, I'm observing this from my standpoint, and I know you're balancing both what you believe to be the right design approach with what you believe to be the right process and respect for showing to the town of Gardnerville and their process. Again, just as an observer, the question I would ask is, it would seem like this thing would have gone back to the town board for another bite at the apple before it came here. But again, that was just my observation. So good luck with your decision. I'm glad I'm not up there with you, but maybe someday I will be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the meeting room that would like to make public comment? Please sign in and state your name.
Butch Perry for the record, Chairman, members. As the gentleman that just spoke before me, This is a tough situation for all of you. I really believe what he said about the wedge. I think it gets kind of where Bryce was coming from. This gentleman back here, it's either the highway, it's his way or no way. Reed and I met with him personally and tried to figure out how we could do this. There was no give, none, zero. Metal was metal. It didn't care if it was aluminum, tungsten, or the finest metal in the world. It was metal. And you couldn't use it, okay? He has no give or take. He's black and white. He strong hands his board. I met with 4 of the town board members. The only one I didn't meet with is Mike, and it's kind of odd that Mike's here and not Linda, Mary, Ken, or Mr. Aguirre, Lloyd. I met with them to talk about, this is my town too. We want to do it the right way. But to have a gentleman like Brian says, cost, we had his attorney browbeat the board and say, you can't take cost into consideration. If it doesn't pencil, that's your problem. You can't take it into consideration. And you have people like Nick says, well, they can move across the street. Well, if the Corley Ranch wasn't approved for a big master plan change, division, I guess could build it on the Corley Ranch. They could build it on the Native American property. They could go out Sawmill. I put in almost $7 million of roads to improve this county. A road that Mr. Nick, we'll just call him Nick. Mr. Nick drives on a road that I built. I spent $7 million. I just spent another $500,000 to finish it to the canal. I'm paying $50,000 a year in property tax. And I look at these members here, and I ask you, there's not 1 square foot of my property that's been developed. And I have a beautiful project here that could be developed. And you have to start somewhere. And I'm paying all this property tax, and I'm trying to build a project that the community needs, not just Gardnerville, but Minden, the ranchos. People that want to fish, have a boat, need to go topaz. People have stuff up at Lake Tahoe. This is really, really sad.
Mr. Perry, I think, Mr. Perry, your time has expired. If you could.
Heavy hand. No, I paid too much taxes. Give me a couple more minutes. This guy heavy hands his board. I've met with his board people.
Mr. Perry, if you could keep your comments to the merits of the issue, well, I'll give you 1 more minute.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I met with the board, everyone except for Mike. They said to meet us in the middle, work with us. We'll work with you. But they have to go through Eric, and he heavy hands everybody.
Mr. Perry, please talk about the merits of the project, or I would ask you to conclude.
Okay. Reed went to the county because he does that in all of his processes. That's where they start, and he's building this to the county standards. Okay, so you got county standards and you got Town of Gardnerville criteria or codes. And I think Bryce brings this out, and even Mark brings this out. There's a problem here. And so you can't be part of the problem. You have to be part of the solution. And the only way you can get results is by being part of a solution on anything you do. And you can't get to result being part of the problem. And that's what I'm trying to say here is I don't own that property. I wouldn't put a project on my property, Kurt, that would devalue the rest of my property.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. We've given you an extra extension, and we appreciate your comments. Thank you. Are there other members of the public in the meeting room who would like to make public comment?
Mike Henningsen again, as a public person. Again, I want to say thank you to all you planning commission and Mr. Reynolds, the applicant, and Butch. But you guys, the planning commission, brought up some excellent points. I mean, this is the first time I've been to a planning commission meeting, and this has been a wonderful experience for me because a lot of very valid points have been brought up. I think me as a chairman of the board, and I think defining what is steel. I mean, I agree with you. Mr. Bryce there said that, what is steel? Well, I agree with you 100%. There needs to be some clarification on quality of steel, and steel is unacceptable. We all know steel isn't unacceptable. Steel is used everywhere. But how it applies to the guidelines, we need to review that. I'm not saying we change the guidelines necessarily, but we need to somehow define what we mean when we say no metal. That is clearly an oversight on somebody's part, saying no metal is allowed anywhere in design guidelines. So I appreciate your bringing that up and clarifying that. And I think we as a board will do our best to try and clarify that so it's not such a wedge that we're talking about. And I believe that's where the whole wedge is right here is how do you make this thing look substantial, look aesthetically pleasing, not only now, but in the future. And you guys have brought that point up very clearly that we somehow need to figure that out. And I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there additional public comment in the hearing room?
Michelle Pablo, Deputy Clerk, for the record, there seems to be no more public comment in the room.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I believe Ellie is on the Zoom call. Ellie, would you like to make public comment?
Yes, thank you so much. I have comments and questions, and I'll just run through them for answering or not. Who is the direct neighbor adjacent to Building E? Does code govern enclosed storage versus the open boat stalls the same or differently? It was mentioned about demand and suggest, can there be rental priority for Gardnerville and Douglas County people first? I mean, there's sure lots of people in Lake Tahoe and other communities that are going to want to use this boat storage. What is the height of the fencing around the current airport storage facility? Back to Building E, how many units are in that building, which is enclosed and visible to the neighbor with a proposed 6-foot fence, maybe possibility of eliminating it to be a nice neighbor? Also, if landscaping is coming back, possibility of putting landscaping at buildings F, G, and H for future buffer of future development and the neighborhood. Much like the community plans, it sounds like the town design review documentation certainly needs a refresh and specificity, and it is an appropriate request to do that. There's lots of ambiguity there, and just speaking from listening to other projects in the past, our community plans, are out of date, and so are materials, it sounds like. I don't really have a preference of what comes forward, but with the ambiguity and everybody's confusion about metal, it sounds like there needs to be some more updates to that design review. Is this about town aesthetics and authenticity, metal versus historical brick and mortar? These are lots of questions. It does sound like that this project needs some massaging for sure. I agree that this should not be ad hoc. I was very disappointed at a previous administrative hearing where a senior project was changed significantly, and staff only, it's very similar to this, didn't get a lot of information before the meeting. It was subsequently granted an extension, which I believe was erroneous. And again, there's lots of different approaches to this. The town does govern its own design review, much like some developers govern their specific plans. I think there's lots to take a look at here and lots of reconsideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. You have posed a lot of questions, and if Sam Booth does have some information that he wants to share in response to those, I think I can just respond as I view the site plan. Building E is on the west end of the property, and I believe that's all. In fact, I think all the surrounding property is owned by the owner of the existing site. So that would be Mr. Perry's property. And then I think you also asked a question on design review. And again, Sam Booth, you can amplify if I misstate. Design review is kind of an ongoing process. We approve the proposed design review that comes before us, but as Sam has indicated, and as he has put in the proposed condition, you have to submit revised plans, and you have to always be consistent with what the conditions are in the approval, or the county just doesn't issue a building permit. It kind of comes down to that as the bottom line, and the county can enforce all of the requirements through issuance or non-issuance of a building permit. But Sam Booth, if I misstated anything, please correct me, or if there are other responses that you wanted to give, I would yield to you at this point.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Sam Booth, Deputy Director, for the record. I think the first thing I'll start out with is I know there's been several comments or questions about the revisions that we received from the applicant ahead of today's meeting, and then the fact that staff didn't send the application back to the town board for review. A couple of things to discuss there, and the chairman made a good point about in a design review, typically this is a staff level review, and as our planners and engineers in the office are reviewing a design review, it's an ongoing process and a back and forth between the developer and the applicant and staff. As we identify something that needs updated or something that's deficient with the code, we'll point that out to them. We'll request they make a change. They'll make a resubmittal to us. We'll review that, and we'll go back and forth for a while. I know a lot of times we're criticized for approving quite a few of those administrative type reviews. But that's exactly why they get approved, is because we go back and forth until we get a desirable product that we can approve and that we feel like meets the code. As far as not going back to the town board in this case, and it is the case with every design review, it's also the case with quite a few of our other applications that our staff's hands are tied by the timeline set in Title 20 in the development code. And for a design review, staff has 30 working days to either approve or deny the application. So for this application, we deemed that it was complete on October 7th. So today is exactly 45 days past us that we've had this application in review. So at that 30th working day, and Sam Taylor can correct me if I'm wrong, but if staff doesn't make a decision, the code says that it is automatically approved. So it's incumbent on us to make a decision within 30 working days. We must do that. Within that timeline, it's very difficult to get it sent to the town and have the town board hear that within 30 working days. But we do that, and there is time for that. And there was, in this case, the town heard it in November at their board meeting. I think the difficulty is the town board, obviously, as we know, recommended denial. Some of the comments were that they hoped the application would come back to them. And we've seen that on some other applications that the town has asked the developer to come back to them. The problem is the town is an advisory body. If the town were incorporated and they were able to solely review these applications, Douglas County wouldn't be held by these timelines. But if our staff doesn't make a decision on it, then it's automatically approved. So we have to make the decision, and we have to discuss that with the applicant are they okay with going back to the town board? Because it's going to exceed that 30-day timeline. So as I said, we're at 45 days today. The only reason we're here is because the applicant agreed to come to this hearing. Now, I think the town manager's opinion is that, hey, look, staff, you have a 5-0 denial from the board. Your decision within that 30 working days should just be to flat deny the project. And again, it goes back to the fact that, that the town board's advisory, of course, we've had discussion about the design guidelines, and as I stated in my presentation, I think there's some inconsistencies in the guidelines. I think that the design guidelines themselves show images of buildings in industrial parks with metal siding, and they even call that out in there. So it's perfectly, as has been stated, it's perfectly the town's jurisdiction to be able to review that and say, look, we don't believe there's ambiguity here. We believe it's straightforward and that you can't have metal on any structure anywhere in the town, in the town's jurisdiction. And they did that, and they made a 5-0 recommendation. As staff is reviewing this, if I'm going to deny the application, now Douglas County is owning that decision. Douglas County is saying that we're denying this based on these guidelines and the interpretation here. And so for me, I just, as staff has reviewed that, we just disagreed with that. Just that interpretation. I think the town manager talked about how he's able to interpret the guidelines. There was some discussion that Bryce had about, are there definitions within the guidelines, and some of these things are not defined. I don't know that that's a flaw within the guidelines, that there should be definitions. I think by design, the design guidelines are just guidelines, and they're not supposed to have definitions. They're not supposed to have, like Title 20 does, not bullet points, but sections with subsections clearly defined to quote to those sections. The design guidelines use bullet points to call out items that need to be improved. Again, I think this all just goes to, these are items to initiate a discussion with the developer and to push a project in the right direction. The town has said, these are the guidelines that we want, but that's incumbent on the town manager and staff and the town board to talk to that developer and to make that project work and be as close to the guidelines as you can get. But there is some ability to interpret them as guidelines. They are not Douglas County code. Again, I think the discussion today is also why we brought this forward to the Planning Commission. We wanted to have a discussion about the issues, the concern that we see, here. But to the points that this wasn't able to go back to the town board, we had to ask the applicant, were they willing to extend that 30 working days to go back to the town board for a hearing? We did that. The applicant said that they would not like to go back to the town board, that they reached out to Eric, and that they were told that they needed more time, that they couldn't be placed on the agenda. I think, as Eric stated, I think his email did say he gave them time to make adjustments. But the applicant asked us, and this was an option to bring this forward to the Planning Commission. They said they would extend their timeline to today's date. So today's date is what we were bound by. And the town's next meeting would be in January and extend this further there. I know there were some other comments made. I think I'd agree with the chair. From public comment, Building E is on the west side of the site, and the adjacent property is Mr. Perry's property. He's also the adjacent owner to the north. I don't know if there are any other questions about the site design there, but if you have any other questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. We appreciate your attention to the details there. Let's come back to the Planning Commission. At this point, we've heard from all of the relevant parties and had public comment. We can either move directly to a motion and review that. The proposed motion is on page 55. Variations can be made in that motion as the Planning Commission members would like. As Sam Taylor indicated previously, we have findings that begin on packet page 62, and those are always important for people to cite depending on how they vote. And then again, we have conditions. Those begin on page 65. I didn't count the conditions, but as is usually the case, they are numerous. And as Sam Booth indicated in his initial presentation, he is proposing that we have a new condition, C3, that talks about the applicant must submit revised plans prior to approval of issuance of a building permit. So I will defer to my colleagues for whatever your pleasure is. If you would like to kick this around a little bit more for discussion, we can certainly have a discussion and an exchange of ideas, or we can move towards a motion.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Bryce, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, earlier you had sought to help clarify for us kind of why we're here today. So I think I'd want to go back to that because I think it's an important part of what's happening here. Can you clarify? So our vote today is based upon whether or not this particular development meets these 8 findings or doesn't as it pertains to the county, correct?
Sam Taylor for Douglas County DA's office. When you say the county, you're talking about the county including the town or just the counties?
Yeah, not including the town. Because my understanding is that these findings are related to Douglas County Code and do not necessarily take into consideration the design guidelines, or am I inaccurate there?
I think you're slightly inaccurate.
Okay.
And if you look at, like, for example, proposed finding number A, it's talking about the adopted master plan. One of the things that Eric noted is that the master plan does incorporate the town's standards and guidelines and plan for posterity. And also the board, the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners, specifically passed a resolution which indicates that they wanted the town standards to be taken into account to the extent practical and to the extent it does not conflict with county code. Now, I'm not sure if Mr. Booth pointed this out or Mr. Dallaire at some point in time, but under the county code, metal can be used in a service industrial zone, so as a building material. But what the board has done is place on top of our existing standards a requirement that the county examine the town standards and look at those and try to incorporate those to the greatest extent practicable. Unfortunately, for this planning commission, you have to determine to what extent it is practicable to apply those standards to this particular case, and then also to determine whether or not there's a conflict with Douglas County Code with respect to the use of metal within a service industrial zone. So that's unfortunately your burden.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I think one point of clarification is you mentioned standards a couple times, but you didn't mention guidelines. And so, Mr. Booth, can you help me again clarify the difference between guidelines and standards within the town and guidelines and standards within the county, if there's a difference?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may, Sam Booth for the record. Mr. Klutz, are you asking specifically what are the standards in Douglas County Code, or do they conflict, or those type of things, or you're just asking a general questions about standards versus guidelines?
You made the comment earlier, if I remember correctly, that these were just guidelines. But Mr. Taylor, a minute ago, referenced standards. So that's where I'm hung up is are we voting on whether or not this meets the county's and the town's standards, or whether it meets the county's and the town's guidelines?
Mr. Klutz, if I may, I can maybe clarify. I'm sorry, I was imprecise in my language there relating to standards. What I was trying to get at is that the standards that we would employ in examining this, county staff, would include the town's guidelines to the extent practicable. That's the mandate that the board has placed upon county staff and in this case on the planning commission rendering a decision on this particular topic.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. So going back to Mr. Booth, so in your opinion, because there's a motion before us to approve this major design review, it is your opinion that although Mr. Nielsen would argue that it doesn't meet the town's guidelines, you believe that it does because you've applied those guidelines as part of the overall standards, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Bryce. That was very helpful. Other comments before the Planning Commission moves to a motion? We don't have a motion yet on the table, but I'd entertain comments. If we don't want to have additional comments, we can move to a motion and then we can debate the motion. Sam, do you want to put up the proposed motion? I don't want to force anybody's hand, but we do have the proposed motion that is on packet page 55. And then if you also, if there is any further discussion, as I've mentioned before, we have a proposed additional condition that would further condition the project. But
Chairman, this is Nick Meyer. I have a question on finding number G, which is on page 65. It says the proposed development complies with all additional standards imposed on it by the particular provisions of this chapter, the Douglas County design criteria and improvement standards, and all other requirements of this title applicable to the proposed development and uses within the applicable base zoning district, including but not limited to the adequate public facilities policy of chapter 20.1.0, in that the project meets or exceeds all mandatory Title 20 and Douglas County design criteria and improvement standards requirements. Now, there's no reference in here to any requirement that this project meet, according to the resolution by the Board of County Commissioners, the guidelines of the Gardnerville town. Is that an oversight?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
yes, Sam Taylor, go ahead.
Sam Taylor again for the record. It's not an oversight. The board, and I don't know the reason why, chose not to pass the language contained in the resolution in ordinance form, which would have mandated, I think, changes to the Douglas County Code to accommodate those additional provisions. And quite frankly, that's sort of the problem I think that staff is facing relative to how to apply the town design guidelines. It makes it difficult for them to determine how to do this, because clearly the code itself references the standards, which is what Mr. Booth was referring to earlier, but there is an additional mandate placed on county staff, and I think the Planning Commission, to incorporate the town's design standards to the greatest extent practicable in rendering a decision on this subject.
Okay, thank you, Sam.
If I can just amplify a little further, or maybe try and put it in layman's language, when the board does something by resolution, it's kind of their intent. And a resolution only requires one reading. It comes before the board, they pass a resolution, they're done with it. When the board passes something by ordinance, it is code. It is the law of the land. It requires two readings and a much more thorough process. So I think the point Sam Taylor is making is an important one. It's a suggestion, and I think it goes to the heart of also what Sam Booth was saying. The towns are advisory. We try to listen to the towns. We should listen to the towns, and that's something important to consider. But in this case, the decision rests with the county, and that's where we're at today. And that's a difficult decision we have to make. So, other members of the Planning Commission with comments or questions, or should we move toward the motion?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, Mr. Booth, would you mind putting the motion up on the screen for review?
Yeah, and I apologize, Sam Booth, for the record. The motion's on packet page 55. I don't have the direct language in the presentation here. I've got an amended proposed condition if the Planning Commission wishes to see it. I've got the recommendation here is the last slide from my presentation. Let's see if I can get that. Which is that staff believes the findings may be made in the affirmative, but this is for design review DP 21-0241. In the staff report, the motion is to approve DP 21-0221, excuse me, let me clarify here. It's 0221 instead of 0241. It's a major design review for a storage facility at 1608 Pine Nut Road. So based on the recommendation, Gardnerville recommendation, as well as the public comment received in the presentation today. So leave it to you whether that's a recommendation of approval or denial.
Mr. Chairman, I propose to make a motion.
Go ahead, Bryce.
I move to approve DP 21-0221, major design review for a proposed personal storage facility located at 1608 Pine Nut Road and within the Gardnerville Community Plan, based on the staff recommendation, accompanied documents, and reports and public comment received. My motion is based on the fact that I do believe that it meets the findings. Although I have a tremendous amount of respect for the town board and the town manager and understand why they came to the ruling that they did, that is not the information and the task before this board today. And so that's the reason for my approval.
Thank you. Bryce moves to approve DP 21-0221. Bryce,
I will second it.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Christie seconds the motion, and if we can get a clarification on the proposed condition as well, if Sam Taylor, if that's what you were asking.
Yes, Mr. Chair. That's where I was headed. Was Mr. Klutz intending to include the condition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. It was my intent to include the conditions.
And Christie, do you concur with that in your second?
Yes, confirmed.
Okay. The motion has been made by Bryce and seconded by Christie to approve the design review for this facility. Is there discussion?
Can I clarify something? We would be adding the proposed condition on the motion that Bryce made, and then another motion would be made to approve the findings under DP 21-0241. That's under the very last page under the packet that Sam Booth provided.
I'm not sure which page you're referring to because I don't have that packet in front of me other than the what's on the screen.
Sam Booth.
But yeah, my interpretation is Bryce's motion would cover
Or is that the
all
only
of the.
one? That's the only motion?
Well, the proposed conditions are detailed in the packet starting on page 65. So C3 that you have on the screen before you there would be an additional planning commission, or excuse me, additional condition that would be opposed to be included with all the rest of them. And there's probably 45 or so conditions that are in the packet. So Bryce's motion, as I would interpret it, would include accepting all of the findings and imposing all of the conditions.
Mr. Chair, Bryce Klutz for the record, that is correct.
Okay. Did that get to your question, Maureen, or did you need more clarification?
Hold on, we're doing corrections. Okay, we got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. So is there discussion on Bryce's motion?
Mr. Chair, Brian Owen.
Okay, Brian, and then Nick, you can go after Brian.
Okay.
So I do not believe this meets finding G, and, based off the review by Gardnerville and their board, I believe, they're indicating also that, this does not meet finding E. If they include metal as something they don't want to see within the town, I would believe that does not meet the finding that it, does not create an visual impact on the surrounding properties. Based off what Mr. Sam Taylor said, is that their standards have to incorporate the design guidelines. So I think at that point, we're making the guidelines part of the standards. And so they're one and the same. So I think the guidelines then become the standards. And for, Sam Booth to read the language that was written by the board with the director who wrote the language and then tell him he's wrong with how he's reading his own language, I think the director made the decision. His board then is, as an independent body, reviewing his decision to make sure his decision was not faulty. And the board agreed unanimously to say that Eric was correct in making the decision that the metal was not wanted. So I think in that instance, now that the guidelines are incorporated as part of the standards, according to what Sam Taylor has said, is that then the town is the one that's going to regulate this, and they don't believe it meets the design criteria under item G. So I don't believe it meets findings E or G.
Thank you, Brian. Nick?
Mr. Chairman, if I could, Bryce Klutz for the record. The basis for my approval was the conversation or discussion had with Mr. Taylor, and it is my understanding that the guidelines are not incorporated into the standards by default. Did I misunderstand that?
The town guidelines, the design guidelines, are not part of any Douglas County ordinance. They are, per the board, and I think Chair Walder had it correct, which is a suggestion on how to apply it. So it's a recommendation from the board. It's not a mandate. I mean, a mandate from the board would be they would include the town guidelines in the code. They are not in the code, but they are to be taken into account to the greatest extent practicable, per the board. How this planning commission decides to implement that is up to the planning commission, and how they fit into the findings is also a decision that must be made by individual members of the planning commission.
Thank you, Sam. Nick, would you like to make some comments on the motion?
Yes. I do believe that it is the wishes of the Board of County Commissioners to respect the guideline standards of the town of Gardnerville, and therefore that they are part of the standards. And number two, voting for this motion is going to cause two problems. Number one, it's going to create a fissure between the Planning Commission and the town of Gardnerville in terms of their guideline standards and specifications. And number two, it's going to set a precedent that metal is now allowed as a material within the town of Gardnerville. Very bad precedents. So I want the board members to understand what voting for this motion is going to cause.
Thank you very much, Nick. Nick, I would agree with you totally on the situation with the towns. I think one of my failings, maybe as a chair during the last 2 years, is we should have done more outreach with the towns. We should have been more directly involved with their activities. So I agree with you 100% on that point. I would disagree with you about the precedent. I think Eric mentioned previously that the town itself approved a design review of a previous project that did have metal on it. So they have gone back and forth on this question. Precedent is always important, but I think the town has doesn't have clean hands on that part of the equation. I will yield to other members of the Planning Commission for comments either for or against the motion. Anybody else want to to speak at this point?
Mr. Chairman, this is Mark, and yes, I'd like to make a few comments.
Please go ahead.
While I personally don't agree with the town of Gardnerville's design guidelines, I think it kind of says, in Gardnerville, we only want to approve premier projects, and because of that, anybody else that shows up that doesn't have the exact type of materials, we're going to deny you. But that's my personal decision, and I have to look at the Town Board of Gardnerville. They are an advisory board. We are an advisory board as well. And I look at it and say, they've made these design guidelines, and I think it's up to us to support the design guidelines that the town of Gardnerville came up with.
Thank you, Mark. Other comments from members of the Planning Commission?
I have a couple. With regards to the town of Gardnerville approving a structure with metal, it was clarified that with Joe Bonino's project, the metal building was in the back of the property. And it was clarified by the town manager that he did not care if the interior of this storage facility was metal or anything else. It was the exterior of the project that they had issues with. And they wanted it to be something other than metal. And I think that's an important distinction. I too feel very strongly that we need to support the towns, and that's where I'm torn. I want to support our county staff. I think they work very, very hard. And my issue is I don't believe that applicants should be allowed to submit changes at the last minute and expect approval when staff is running, especially when we're understaffed, trying to meet these timelines. I know they're set by either county code or by the NRS, and it's unfair all over the state. It's unfair to the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners, and it's disappointing to our staff when we have to vote no on something that they've worked very hard on. But it's also disappointing to our town boards when we say no to something that they've worked hard on. So, you know, again, I'm very torn, but I don't want to send the message to our town boards and saying, well, you can have an opinion, but we're going to say, too bad. Your opinion doesn't count. So therefore, I'm going to vote with counting down the line with the majority and say we have to support our towns.
Thank you very much, Maureen. I agree with virtually everything you said, Maureen. You made very, very important points, but I come to a different conclusion, and I'll be supporting the motion. I think we have to recognize that this is not the same submission that came to the town of Gardnerville. It's a different proposal. So respecting the point that the towns are advisory, and Eric has made a very strong case for what they want and what they don't want. So I don't think we're overriding the towns. I did review the board minutes in detail. I don't think their opinions really were reflected in a 5-0 vote. I think they would have liked to approve the project with some modifications. As Sam Booth has pointed out, the clock has run out. If we took no action today, the design review would be approved. So we have to make a decision. I think we need to respect, as Bryce has pointed out, there's a difference between a standard and a guideline. We'd like to do all of the guidelines, but we have to base it on standards. I think we also have to understand that this is an industrial project. We should understand that industrial projects are going to have different materials. They can have quality metal materials and other quality materials that may be unacceptable in other places. But I think this might be an acceptable use of the materials for a industrial project. And then lastly, I think we have to understand that Douglas County does have different design standards than the towns do. And we're required and we should be obligated to what the county standard should be. We respect the towns, but as I think either Sam Taylor or Sam Booth mentioned, that the towns are not incorporated. The towns are embodied in the county, so they're county decisions. And I would like to repeat what I said before. I think the town was really done a serious injustice by the applicant, and I don't like that one bit. But I do have to base my decision on the findings, and I think the project is conditioned appropriately. I do trust the county staff to strongly enforce the new proposed condition C3, and I would hope that they would deny a building permit if the applicant didn't meet all of their requirements. So I'll be voting in favor of the motion. Is there any other discussion or comments that people would like to make? If not, I think we can take a roll call vote on Bryce's motion. This is approval of the design review with the proposed conditions, including the new condition. And we'll start with Nick.
Nay.
Christy?
Aye.
Bryce?
Aye.
Mark?
Nay.
Brian?
Nay.
Maureen?
Nay.
And the chair votes aye. So on this, we have 3 votes aye and 4 votes nay. So the recommended motion is not approved.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Sam.
You know how this goes. Basically, we need an affirmative motion, so we can take action. That's what's necessary. So if somebody may be voting, Brian looks like he's eager to do the motion, but somebody needs to do a vote to disapprove the application.
I'll entertain such a motion.
Brian Olin for the record. I'll make a motion to deny the major design review for the proposed personal storage facility via development application DP 21-0221.
Is there a second?
Second.
Maureen seconds the motion that Brian has made to deny the DP 21-0221, the major design review. Is there any discussion that would be made on this motion? Seeing no discussion, I'll call for the vote. And this is a motion to deny. And Nick, we'll start with you.
Aye.
Christy?
Nay.
Bryce?
Nay.
Mark?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
Maureen?
Aye.
And the chair votes nay. So on this, there's 4 votes aye and 3 votes nay. So the motion to deny is approved. That will conclude that particular agenda item. And we'll move on to closing public comment. At this time, public comment will be taken on those items that are within the jurisdiction and control of the Planning Commission, or those agenda items where public comment has not already been taken. Is there a public comment in the meeting room?
Mr. Chair, this is Michelle Pablo, Deputy Clerk. For the record, there seems to be no public comment in the chambers.
Okay, thank you. On Zoom, Ellie, you are still present. If you'd like to make public comment, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much. I've already, on several occasions, spoke before the Board of County Commissioners that we're understaffed in community development, probably other places too. But the budget needs to be revisited. With the 30-day rule that was brought up today, that just brings this front and center. They have requirements per NRS. They have other needs that need to be met, public requests for information, review cycle. I could go on. I just would hope that the Planning Commission would support a revisit of the budget so we can get them some help on their Mission Impossible task today and tomorrow and in the near future to get things done in a timely and studied manner. I really would hate to see projects come through these findings, some of the things that went on today. We shouldn't be ad hocing, bringing projects that haven't had enough review cycle before the public or the board. You got to be concerned about potential open meeting law issues. And then with that said, I'd like to thank all the seated commissioners for their service to date. I know that there is going to be some new appointments by the Board of County Commissioners before the year's out. So I just wanted to thank everybody.
Thank you very much, Ellie, for your comments. If there's no additional closing comment, then I would like to make a brief comment. I want to thank everyone for their good work today. I especially appreciate the work done by the staff, particularly Sam Booth, who filled in for Lorenzo, who started this project. I think Sam is wearing at least 3 hats now, and I hope we'll get him some additional help soon. We do have a special meeting next Tuesday, December 21st, which I hope will conclude our business for the year. I would like to note that today will be Planning Commissioner Christy Candel's last meeting, as she has submitted her resignation. And we want to thank you, Christy, for your 2 years of service, your excellent participation, and for always bringing both your business experience and your common sense to our deliberations. We wish you the best of success in your future endeavors. So if there's no other public comment, Mr. Hamilton, we've concluded public comment at this point. So thank you. If there's no other public comment, then I will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Recording stopped.